These stories are first-hand accounts shared by Reddit users, detailing unsettling real-life encounters that left lasting impressions. Each narrative provides a chilling glimpse into moments of danger, survival, and eerie coincidences that might make you rethink your surroundings. Disclaimer: these accounts were originally published by Reddit users and are presented as personal experiences. While they are described as true events, their accuracy relies on the original storytellers. The details shared here are intended for awareness and cautionary purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised. Story 1. The Horse Ranch. I got married when I was 19 and my husband and I had no clue what to do with our new life together. We dropped out of college and our studio apartment was too expensive. We thought it was the ideal time to travel and have adventures before settling down. We came across a post on the internet from a man who was looking for workers on his horse ranch. He would provide all meals and lodging in exchange for labor around the ranch. It looked like just the solution for us. He claimed to be very knowledgeable in trades and would teach us to build machinery, woodworking, welding. We actually did learn to weld, which is pretty cool, etc. The pictures were beautiful. The log cabin he built was spacious and we would have a nice big bedroom. There were lots of other people in the photos, and in our correspondence with him, he always mentioned other people and referred to himself as we. He advertises on multiple platforms and everything looks really legit. We booked our flight. There was nobody else there. He was in his 60s, but mentally and physically very fit. One of the first things he said to us was, "I never judge people based on their past. Do you believe people can change?" "I sure do." Seemed harmless enough. He took us grocery shopping and told us to pick whatever we wanted. We immediately got the vibe that his kindness was forced and that he was being overgenerous. I'm going to get right into listing the weird stuff we noticed. He built the house himself, and his bedroom had a door to the only upstairs bathroom, which didn't lock from the inside. He would invite us into his room, and on his table was an old video camera with about 30 little tapes strewn about. He would always talk about how much he loved the Japanese, how he specifically marketed toward them, and had a few Japanese ladies stay in the past. He often brought up people who had stayed with him before, and all of them had left suddenly and maybe unexpectedly. One day, he told us to get in the truck, because we were going to the city. We were way out in the country, so it was a long ride, but he was really excited about going. He asked us to walk around and ask young people to come with us and work on the ranch. This made us super uncomfortable. We are introverts, and it just felt very odd to approach people and ask them to get in the truck. He got upset by our disapproval, so we got out and pretended to look for people to talk to. He went to talk to people on his own. As the days went on, his welcoming nature began to give way to a very temperamental and aggressive one. I didn't really find him creepy, but intolerable. I didn't like him at all. He seemed extremely socially inept and said inappropriate things. It was also extremely apparent that he did not view women as equal or anywhere near equal to men. He had military training and was a big, strong man. Cunning. Always thinking. Now, our parents never wanted us to go. They realized it to be a potentially dangerous situation, but we thought we had done our due diligence. However, we never even thought to Google this guy's name. I get an email from my mom one day freaking out and telling me to do a Google search then get on the next plane home. A quick search showed his arrest record: strangling and sexually assaulting a young woman, followed by headlines reading, "Do not go to this horse ranch. This man is dangerous." We were thoroughly creeped out and booked a flight home. We were then presented with the dilemma of how to tell a potentially dangerous man that we wanted to leave. I forgot to mention that he would tell us daily about how we could live there permanently and start a family. He would fantasize about Christmas with our future children and raising them on the ranch. We thought it was established that this was a very temporary thing, and we had families back home who missed us. This is the weirdest part for me. I made up a lie about an emergency back home, and when I told him, it was like he could see right through me. I'm convinced that he not only knew I was lying, but he knew I was going to lie about needing to leave before I even opened my mouth. This look came over him that I have never seen on a person before. He was angry but hiding it. He was hiding so many thoughts and emotions that I couldn't tell if I should be frightened or relieved. Before I finished my sentence, he said, "When do you need to go to the airport?" Monotone. I told him right now. He took us, and put on his friendliest personality, and told us that if we ever wanted to come back, he would buy our tickets. We said we would be in touch. Just recently I googled his name again, and discovered a page, a forum, for people who had gone to his ranch. Mostly couples like us with eerily similar experiences. They spoke about how he says not to judge people on their past, the grocery store, the bathroom, and how they heard him listening behind his door during their midnight bathroom trips, the videotapes, and how they watched them and saw young Japanese girls flexing their arms. Looking through his search history and seeing nothing but Japanese pornography. They talk about how he would make rude remarks to the girlfriends and about creepy rituals in the woods, which we experienced. It was like a full moon ritual inside a circle drawn on the ground. They spoke about being driven to the city and asked to jump out when thin young ladies walked by, and tell them to come back to the ranch. I could go on and on. He is still operational. This forum I found was aimed at gathering stories and preventing future visitors to the ranch. The police do not have enough evidence to convict him of anything. I know I left a lot of creepy deets out. I didn't want this to be too long, and I'm not a great storyteller. I'm unsure whether it would be appropriate to name the man or the ranch, but the blog where all the others have written about their encounters is probably much creepier than my story. We got away with much less weirdness because I don't believe I was his type, and he may have feared my husband. If anyone is interested, I may be able to give a few hints so it can be found. Story 2. The boyfriend I didn't know I had. I believe I was about 16 when this took place and was in sixth form college here in the UK, so I'm guessing it was in the summer of 2001. It was either a Friday or Saturday night when I got a text, asking what I was up to and if I wanted to go out. I had no idea who the text was from as the number wasn't saved in my phone and didn't have a name at the end of the text. I text back and got a call. Picking it up, I hear my friend Ong's voice. I was happy to hear from her as we went to secondary school together. I went on to college and she decided to do other things, so we didn't see each other regularly anymore. She didn't have social media and refused to have a mobile phone. I praised her for finally getting with it and getting a phone. She burst my bubble when she said it was a friend. We had a quick chat. It was probably about 10 p.m. and I CBA to get ready, so I declined and said another time. Around 12 a.m. I got a text. I thought she was contacting me again. The text read something along the lines of, "Hey, this is Daniel, Ong's friend. I'm bored and stuck here, till Ong wants to leave. Hope you don't mind me texting you." I didn't. At this age I used to be up till stupid o'clock on the internet, and as he was a friend of my friend, I didn't see a problem. So he texted me for a bit. It was a kind of nothingness conversation. Around 2 a.m. or so I get a call. It's him. He said I sounded nice and that he wanted to have a chat. Okay, cool, I'm still wide awake, so we had a chat. It was alright, we had a laugh, talked about nothing much for a while, then said goodbye. Next morning I get a text from him. I reply. He texts me all day and rings me again later. I found out more about him, that he works in the local shopping center in a certain store I went to all the time, the kind of stuff he likes, which is nothing like me, but whatever. We talk about where we live as we live in different towns about 20 minutes apart by bus. At this point, he knows what I look like as Ong has shown him photos of us she had, but he has also seen my Friendster page, which had current pics of me. He, like Ong, didn't have social media back then, so I didn't know what he looked like, but he described himself, could have been literally any boy in SE London at that time. I didn't really care what he looked like as I wasn't interested like that, but I had no problem chatting. So this carries on for a week or two, him texting me / calling me to find out about me, asking loads of questions, which at the time seemed harmless. Around this time I had time off college for Easter holidays and he started saying we should meet up as we are both free. I tell him I can't as I have to do some coursework. This was only half true. I did have CW, but I always leave it till the last minute, so was literally just being lazy and sitting about the house. He clearly didn't get the message, as he started to text me constantly. If I didn't reply fast enough for him, he sent more texts and would call. I was like, dude, I am so busy trying to do this. When I have time I will text you. After a few days of that, I got a text saying, I've had to go do X to Y, Z, I am in your area, let's meet. I told him I was busy and couldn't. He said that was okay, but then kept bombarding me with texts urging me to meet him. 2 days later, I get a text saying he is in my area again, we have to meet. At the end of that week he is there again and again no. At the start of the next week he starts again about being in my area. I ignore the text this time. Later on that day I get a call from a local area number. I pick up and it's him. He says he is here and wants to hang out and that I didn't reply to his text. I tell him I'm not at home and I've been flat out and that I will text him when I'm free. I found out the number he called from was a public telephone box on the main road that connects to the road I live on. The constant texts were annoying, but I let them slide as I had no intention on meeting him and it was only a text, but to find out that he actually was literally in my area and knew roundabout where I lived, all the questions he was asking before that seemed harmless made sense now. He was narrowing down where I lived to the street, as I have a college at the bottom of my road and a park at the top. He knew this. He knew what bus I got from college and the stop I got off at, which further narrows down the part of the street I lived on. He used to ask things about the clothes I wore and accessories I had, what patches etc. were on my backpack. So he would definitely know it was me if he saw me. Now this was not cool at all. I told him that I am not meeting him anytime soon, that I am busy and that he needs to chill the hell out as I don't need the hassle. This really put me off wanting to speak to him, as it was fucking weird and I really should have told him to fuck off at this point. But when you don't really care about the person other than to have a chat with, I just thought if I lessen the contact he will get bored and piss off of his own accord. School started again and I felt safer knowing that he couldn't just be in my area when he had college quite far from me, so I wouldn't run into him. But the shop I usually went to, which was near my college, I avoided as there was nothing in there I couldn't get elsewhere and didn't really go into the shopping center unless I had to, and that would be during school lunchtime, so he wouldn't be there. This wasn't because I was scared, I just didn't ever want to meet him and I was starting to get pissed the more I thought about it and didn't want to be nasty to him. So the texts continued. Over the next few weeks, I wouldn't reply to the majority of them, and when I did they were polite and stated that as I had exams soon, I didn't want the distraction. I then started to ignore his messages. They didn't stop. Another phone number I didn't know texted me. I was like, who is this? And of course it was him from his mom's phone and he was pissed off. I'd replied to that text and not his. Now this was becoming a fucking joke. During this time one Saturday night my mum rang me as I was coming home from a gig. She told me a boy I went to primary school called Morley rang to speak to me today and asked if he could call again, and before the call ended asked if I had a boyfriend. I was like, what? Morley used to like me back in primary, but we hadn't spoken since we left school at like 11, but our mums still chatted occasionally, so I had no clue what the hell that was all about. I got a call from Morley the next day. He tells me he's sorry for ringing me, but he really needs to ask me a question. So he asked me if I had a boyfriend. I said I didn't. He then asked me if I knew someone called Daniel. I said yes, that I had been speaking to someone called Daniel, but what started out as a pleasant chat and some texts had turned into way too much. He then went on to tell me that Daniel goes to his 6th form and is, loosely, associated with his friend group, as no one really likes him. Boys being boys, they were talking about girls, and Daniel went on to talk about his girlfriend. They asked questions about her and he told them who she was, what she looked like, what she was into, where she lived, etc. etc. He didn't think much of it. When he came back to school after the holidays, he had a bunch of clothes in his bag. They asked him where he was going as they were uniform, and he was bragging about how he had come straight from hers as he stayed round her house lots during the holiday and told them in detail how he fucked her and got up to all sorts. He used to entertain them with stories all about her and after a while finally showed them her picture, my picture. Morley was livid on the phone. He said the stuff Daniel was saying that we had done was just plain nasty, and the stuff he was saying about me he didn't think was true and wanted to confirm. He told me he would ring me back in a few days. Daniel was still trying to speak to me. After hearing from Morley what he had been up to, I'm not going to answer clearly. I set the number to divert. I don't know if you could block numbers on my phone back then. If it could, I didn't know how. I ignored the texts he sent me. I didn't even open them. I got home from school Monday afternoon and about 6 o'clock I get a call from Morley, who again was pissed off but was delighted. He told me he just got home and that Daniel had come into school with clothes in his bag again that morning and said how he has been staying at mine and that we fucked etc. At that point Morley in front of everyone was like, you have never been to her house? He was like, of course I have, and Morley was like, it must have been a fucking Wendy house as he knows for. certain that he has never been to my house, as he knows me and had spoken to me yesterday, and that I am not his girlfriend. In fact, he has never met me, only spoken to me, and how I refused to meet him and have been pretty much ignoring him as he kept turning up where I live to try and spot me. This didn't go down well, obviously, as he had been made to look like a complete fucking twat. That night my phone wouldn't stop with texts and calls from his mum's number. He wouldn't stop calling. I told my mum everything after Morley called, as she wanted to know what it was about. I gave the phone to my mum at like 11 p.m. and she picked up, and he was sounding all in a panic, saying he needed to talk to me. She said no, I was bad, how inappropriate it was to call at this time, and not only that but don't call me again. The number was put on divert and I was still getting voicemails. I texted him and told him to leave me alone. That really is enough now. I know what he did and that I don't want to know him. He went quiet till around 2 a.m. when he started calling again from a third number. I was asleep and my mum was awake. The call woke me up, so I called her in and she picked up the phone and went fucking mental at him. She said she knows all about it and to leave me alone or there will be trouble. He still texted after that. My mum was beyond livid, and at 6 a.m., she rang his mum's mobile, woke her up, told her all about what her son was up to. She was initially pissed off to be woken so early, but when my mum laid it out, she just went quiet and was like, I am sorry, I will deal with it. I didn't hear from him again after that. Ong called me. I hadn't spoken to her since that first night, about probably just over a month and a bit before, and said she found out what had happened, I think from his mum, as she wanted to know the validity of the call she received and was so incredibly sorry. That he wasn't even really her friend. They knew each other from primary school and he lived close, and that he just turned up at her house and imposed himself on her, and her mum would always let him in despite her warning her not to, as she liked him, so she just put up with him. She did say that in the past, when he was in secondary school, he became obsessed with a girl in their area and used to effectively stalk her, and that her mum complained to him, but that he was young then and didn't think he did stuff like that anymore. Clearly he was. So Daniel, for a 17-year-old, you were a fucking wrong'un. I dread to think what you are like now. Let's not meet. Story 3. Terrorized for 2 hours. This happened when I was in college. I lived in Isla Vista, the student community at UCSB, notorious for being a party school. It fully lived up to its reputation. I like to party, but holy shit, these people were off the wall. As such, there were a lot of people who put themselves in dangerous situations, drinking to excess, not being careful, not locking doors, etc. It had a very isolated and insular vibe, and anyone who was hanging around who wasn't college-aged immediately looked out of place and strange. One night, after having a few drinks, I came home to my small house where I lived with 2 other girls, probably around 2:30 a.m. We were all serious students. I was probably the least serious, actually, and when we partied it was not your typical UCSB mega rager. More like a small get-together with friends. We would often have a few people spend the night, sleep on our furniture or in our beds as the case may be. That night my roommates had had a few people over who I didn't know, and I saw when I returned home that one of them had opted to sleep on the couch from the shadow that I saw there. I didn't turn the lights so I wouldn't wake anyone up. But as I was passing the couch to enter my bedroom, I noticed that the figure was lying very stiff. He just had this weird energy to him. He was lying down, but it was like he was putting all of his energy into lying as still and rigid as possible. I paused, and the guy quickly jerked his head to face me without moving his limbs, so quickly that it startled me. I could see his wide-open eyes glinting in the dark. Figuring that I'd startled him, or that he was drunk or maybe on some kind of stimulant and unable to sleep, I just hurried past into my bedroom and locked the door. The dude made me nervous and I wasn't taking any chances. I fell asleep. At 4:30 a.m. I woke up. There was a strange sound at the door, almost like somebody was drumming their fingers against the wood very quietly. I lay still and listened. There were more quiet sounds, like someone scratching the door with their fingers, which got louder and louder until it was clear that he was using both hands and scratching as fast and as hard as possible. It created an extremely loud and intimidating sound that filled me with fear. I got my cell phone and texted my roommate because I was afraid to make a sound. Your friend is freaking me out. Is he cooked? Can you talk to him? He's banging and scratching on my door. She didn't text me back, probably because she was asleep. I texted my other roommate to the same effect, covering all my bases. Keep in mind that the scratching has been going on at this point for a couple minutes. I have no idea how he could have sustained it. Scratching a wooden door with your fingernails can't feel good. He also grabbed at the knob and jiggled it super forcefully. Because neither of them answered, I decided to call and really wake them up, though I was scared to make a sound. I know it sounds stupid, but there was something seriously horrifying about being teased like this through the door. I knew that he was trying to terrify me. I felt like a little kid, but I could tell this guy was fucked up or something, and maybe the police needed to be called, and I wanted to loop my roommates in since it was one of their friends. The scratching stopped abruptly and I called my roommate, who answered sleepily. "Yo, your friend is messed up, can you please deal with it? Do we need to call the cops?" He's seriously scaring me and he was scratching at my bedroom door, really fucking weird. She didn't say anything for several seconds, and when she did speak, her voice had no sleepiness in it at all. "What friend?" She said, "That fucking guy that was sleeping on the couch." I said. She was quiet again. "We didn't have any guys over," she said. "Call the police." My adrenaline surged and I told her to please lock the bedroom door as quickly as possible. I realized that I hadn't heard scratching in a while, and I had no clue where the dude had gone. Suddenly I heard a loud banging in the other end of the house, where my roommates, Lauren and Monica, shared a bedroom. The bangs were followed by the sound of them screaming in fear. I quickly dialed the police as this maniac proceeded to bang against the, luckily, locked bedroom door of my two roommates as they screamed. The heaviness of the blows left no doubt that he was trying to break the door down. I told the 911 operator the situation and she dispatched 2 squad cars. The police in Isla Vista are generally used to peeling drunks off the sidewalk and breaking up brawling frat brothers. This was really serious and strange, and I think the dispatcher got the sense from my tone how terrified I was, and she stayed on the phone with me. At one point the banging stopped and everything was quiet for a while. I talked with the dispatcher and suddenly looked down to see that this guy had slipped his fingers through the 1-inch gap between my door and the floor and was just kind of waggling them around, making this weird growling sound. I screamed and backed away, which is my biggest regret about this situation, since when I look back it would have been so awesome to just stomp the shit out of those fingers and hear the guy howl in pain. When the cops rolled up, I heard running and the sound of our sliding glass door opening and closing, and then he was gone. The cops never caught him. He had broken in through our side door by jimmying the lock somehow. My door was covered in what turned out to be huge gauges he'd made using a pair of scissors, which he discarded on the ground before he left. What terrifies me most about this was that I walked right past him. I looked him right in the face. I realize now that he was not trying to sleep or on drugs, but was lying so stiff like that because he was hiding. He probably heard me open the door, and freaked out because he hadn't realized there was another girl living there, and tried to blend into the couch in the darkness. Story 4. Neighbors lurking in the dark. Okay, so I've had a few issues with my next-door neighbor since I moved in, but nothing creepy until just recently. There is a man, a woman, and at least one boy living there, and I mostly just avoid them. The man seems okay but a bit weird, and the boy just keeps to himself. The woman is quite a bit off. Crazy encounter. Not long after we moved in, she left a note in my mailbox. Our mailboxes are right beside each other, between our houses. Anyway, I stood at the mailbox reading the note. She thought that my dog was pooping in her yard. It was possible, as our fence had some holes in it, that our dog had gotten out then. But those holes had been fixed a long time ago. Still no big deal. Except I noticed her standing in her driveway, just staring at me. And the note was very long. I kept reading it. The more I read, the crazier it got, and the weirder her behavior in my peripheral vision became. Apparently I was entitled. She seemed to think I was somehow instructing my dog to poop in their yard. Her note went on a tangent about how awful dogs are. She was also 100% convinced it was my dog, even though there are always tons of loose dogs, cats, and wildlife wandering around and no doubt traveling through her unfenced backyard. In my peripheral vision, she got into her SUV, backed out of her driveway, then parked it along the street directly behind me and just idled there, staring. The note then went on a weird, long tirade about the previous family to live in my house, saying I was another Deb, as if I'd have any idea at all what that is even supposed to mean. then concluded in some odd insults and some implied not-quite threats. This was the closest thing we had ever had to a conversation at this point. I can understand not wanting a dog pooping in her yard, but this was a bit of an extreme reaction as this was literally the first time I'd even heard of there being a problem. A simple note would have done, but this note was insane. She was still staring behind me. I decided to try to ignore her and just go to my house. That's when she shouted out her window, "Are you playing a game?" That reaction made no sense. "Are you nuts?" I replied as I officially ran out of patience. She shouted more nonsense and insults at me while blocking my driveway, which was right next to the mailboxes, with her vehicle, while I repeatedly told her to leave before I called the cops. This went back and forth like that for a while, but he eventually sped off when I pulled my cell out. Later, my boyfriend, who had not been home at the time this happened, had a chat with the neighbors. He said they seemed agreeable and reasonable and basically dismissed me of just being dramatic. The woman told a very different version of events, of course. I was annoyed that my boyfriend wasn't taking me seriously, but let it go. I think he just wanted to keep getting along with the man next door as they sometimes borrowed tools. They speak to him a lot differently than how they speak to me, and they don't do anything rude to me while he is around. In fact, they don't speak to me when he is around at all. They always wait for him to be away. Creepy encounter. Anyway, I mostly just avoid them. Sometimes the woman stares at me, but I just ignore her. Until recently, I have been mostly successful. Here's the creepy story. I don't sleep well at night when I'm home alone, and I'm always home alone now because my boyfriend is out of the country on business for months at a time. I often feel like there's someone just outside my house or at my door. Sometimes my dogs act up at odd hours. But I never see anyone. I keep my house alarm armed and a pistol in my nightstand. The other night was one such night. I didn't sleep well and kept having a sinking feeling that something was wrong. Anyway, I got out of bed at about 2 a.m. because I thought I was scheduled to work at 3 a.m. I had mostly given up on getting a restful sleep then anyway. As I left my house, I heard something to my left, the direction of my neighbor's house, but didn't see anything. I was always nervous in my driveway because the motion sensor light was broken. There was always a lot of darkness between my door and my truck. So I always moved quickly in my driveway. I got in my truck and went to work. It turned out that I misread my schedule and didn't work at 3 that morning after all. Annoyed at the mistake but grateful I'd get to go home and sleep a little more before the actual start of my shift at 7, I went home. I pulled into my driveway and didn't see anything in the beam of my truck's headlights. I always look around my truck before getting out. I turned the headlight off and got out. I took a few steps ahead of my truck, then all of a sudden a large man called out to me, shouted, "Really?" from the shadows at the corner of my house. He scared the living crap out of me so bad that I screamed, reached for my pepper spray, and fell down, not useful. He apologized in a tone that didn't sound sorry at all. It was my neighbor, and that wasn't much of a relief. Edit. It took me a few minutes hunched over on the ground to collect myself enough to find out WTF he wanted. I was seriously freaking out and kind of having a mini panic attack. My heart was racing and I was shaking. I was obviously visibly upset throughout all that follows. Apparently it was my fault that he occasionally found trash in his yard, in windy Colorado. Complaining about this seemed to be a lot more important issue than scaring the hell out of a woman alone at night. He showed no real concern or realization that was even wrong at all. Again, I have no problem with neighbors bringing issues to my attention, but seriously, hey, can you make sure trash from your bins isn't blowing into my yard, thanks, bye, is not a statement that takes 10 freaking minutes, nor is it one that needs to be addressed at 3 the freaking morning. I nod in agreement to keep the peace, but I know the trash isn't mine. We live in a windy area. Trash gets blown around in people's yards all the time. No big deal. But he just would not stop going on about it. He kept needlessly repeating himself and made some not quite but kinda threat about getting along. Edit. Think along the lines of those, "It would be a shame if something were to happen," type sort of threats. He was keeping me busy. I didn't even notice his wife flanking me. Before I even knew she was there, she appeared from the shadows by a tree. She wanted to yell at me about some eggs. A few weeks ago, I found a bunch of eggs smashed on the road near our shared mailbox. As the carton was right next to them, I thought the carton had obviously just been dropped, not that someone was trying to egg anything. I assumed my neighbor had dropped the eggs on her way to get the mail and just left them. She denies this, but I still think that's the most likely explanation because no one else has any reason to be out our mailbox with eggs, but I didn't care enough to say anything to her about it at the time, so I had just let go and forgot all about it. Now she was accusing me of leaving eggs around, again, inexplicably expressing the grievance at 3 a.m. Weird that she hadn't brought it up weeks ago when it happened, but I know why she didn't. My boyfriend was still here then. Edit. I get my eggs delivered along with my milk. They are delivered to a box by my door, not my mailbox. So they could not have been mine. My boyfriend has been away on business for several weeks now, long enough for them to have noticed his absence. They were also probably aware that my motion sensor light was out. They sure seem to know how to avoid my headlight beams. Sure, it could be a coincidence, but did I mention that this was all at 3 a.m., not some other dark yet reasonable time for a person to be outside? Being surprisingly patient, I explained that I knew nothing about the eggs. I mentioned that I later found a lot of the shells in my yard and figured a squirrel must have carried them there. She proudly informed me that she tossed them onto my yard herself. Apparently she thought that was okay, but someone dropping them in the first place isn't. Anyway, this is where I started to get over my shock a bit and started getting pissed. Initially, I had been somewhat relieved that the man in the shadows had been my neighbor, not some random crazy person. But now I am pissed. I had now been outside with them for something like 20 minutes while they accosted me about stupid crap, while I tried to be polite and agreeable even though I had nothing to do with it. But now everything wrong with the situation had kicked in. I eventually remembered that I don't actually have to put up with any of this and cut her off mid-rant and said, "It's 3 a.m. I'm going home. Good night." And turned on my heel. I heard her say something in an unkind tone as I left, but didn't catch what it was. They had staked out my house, waited for my BF to leave and long enough to be sure he was gone, all to complain about some inane crap long after it supposedly even happened. If they have concerns, surely there are better times to address them than at 3 a.m. What the hell were they doing out at 3 a.m. anyway? And that man had totally purposely hid in a shadow at the corner of my house where he could avoid my headlights, and didn't reveal himself until I was out of my truck and exposed. And shouldn't the woman have walked up beside her husband, not gone around while I was distracted? They keep doing odd behavior. Never enough that they're doing anything illegal or anything to report the police. But none of this is normal behavior. Honestly, I think these complaints are just excuses and they're really just taking the opportunity to intimidate me. I think they're messing with me on purpose. Then again, I could be wrong. They could just be weird and incredibly socially inept but otherwise harmless. Either way, I will be installing a motion light soon. I was so shaken up and had my adrenaline so high from someone scaring me from a blind spot by my house, because seriously that could have been someone else and a lot worse, that I didn't really get any sleep before work. Story 5. It should have been a beautiful drive, but it was a trap. This story is why I always tell someone where I'm going and how I'm getting there. I lived in New Mexico for several years before moving to the Midwest. My friend Amy and I, both females, would spend many days exploring the remote corners of New Mexico, discovering abandoned ghost towns and enjoying the quiet, desolate beauty of the desert. One afternoon in March 2010, we were traveling from Ruidoso to Albuquerque. Always up for exploring, we took a back road rather than traveling the more direct highway. One leg of our journey had us on NM55. It's a remote, teeny, tiny two-lane highway. We loved those types of roads, up until that day. This part of New Mexico is flat and desolate desert. You can see for miles. And there is virtually nothing except dirt and rock between towns, and towns can be miles apart. So we were on NM55 going north. After a few minutes, we saw a white pickup truck up ahead of us going the same direction. Suddenly, he stopped his truck sideways in the middle of the highway, blocking both lanes. We were about a mile away from him, and as we got closer, we began to get uneasy. We could see no reason for him to do this. We were the only other vehicle out there, and we began wondering if we should turn around rather than come up to him and have to stop. We were about a half a mile away from him, when he pulled over to the opposite side of the highway, but his truck was still pointed the direction we were going. We tried to relax a little. Surely this guy was a rancher or something. Maybe he was checking something on his land. As we passed him, we noticed a few things. 1. There was only one person in the truck, a middle-aged guy who never took his eyes off us, and 2. He was talking into a walkie-talkie. A few seconds after we passed him, he pulled back onto the highway and started following us. But he never got too close. He would get to within a few car lengths and then drop back a little and then speed back up again to within a few car lengths. We were getting nervous. We realized how alone we really were. We had seen no other traffic on that road and we hadn't told anyone about our great idea to take this detour. We checked our cell phones and neither one had a signal, typical for remote New Mexico, but scary given our present situation. Amy was driving and speeding up while I frantically checked the map, hoping to find a road that would have more traffic. There was no other road. We had to travel this one to get to the next town, Mountain Air. Turning around to go back the other way didn't seem like a good option. After a few minutes, we saw another pickup truck coming towards us. He was going very, very slowly, maybe 20 mph. This pickup was old and beat up whereas the one behind us was newer. Amy had us up to 75 miles per hour, which wasn't typical for us on these 55 miles per hour highways, and we blew by the old pickup. As we passed it, we saw that it was another middle-aged guy, and he was talking into a walkie-talkie. After the white pickup passed him, he pulled a U-turn and pulled in behind it. As we watched all this, we could see the white pickup truck guy talking into his walkie-talkie. No doubt these two knew each other. We were being deliberately followed. And for the first and only time in my life, I felt hunted. They stayed right behind us. We watched for obstacles in the road. We truly thought an old beat-up pickup guy had set up a trap in the road and our vehicle would be disabled somehow. We talked about driving into the fields. We were in an SUV. But this was obviously their territory, and we were afraid of what would happen if we went off-road and got cornered. So we stayed on the highway. By now, white pickup truck guy was right on top of us. We could see him talking into the walkie-talkie and he stayed right on our bumper. An old beat-up pickup truck guy was right on top of him. The three of us sped down the highway. The white pickup inched closer. His maneuvering and edging closer made it apparent that he was trying to bump us. I watched helplessly as he got to within inches of our back bumper. Amy floored it. We were passing 80 miles per hour and edging up to 90 miles per hour. The road was flat and deserted, but any little thing going wrong would have been catastrophic. We absolutely were not going to slow down or stop if we could help it. The white pickup pulled into the opposite lane and started to gain speed. The only thing we could think of was that he wanted to pass us and get in front of us. If he got in front of us and his buddy was behind us, then we'd be boxed in and trapped. We looked frantically at the rocky desert on both sides of us. Our only option was to off-road it. Should we risk it? Could we speed through the desert and make it to safety in one piece? As we topped a small incline, we saw a sign that said, Salinas Pueblo Missions National Monument, and it pointed towards a road on the left. And right at that moment, a blue pickup truck pulled out of that road and onto the highway in front of us. As we came up on the blue pickup, we saw the plate said, U.S. Park Service. We looked at each other and then looked behind us. Both pickup trucks did U-turns and went the other way. We followed the blue pickup to Mountain Air and then made our way to Albuquerque. I don't know exactly what those guys' intentions were, but they weren't good. There is something seriously wrong out there. I notified the state police and they said they would keep an eye on things. This area is very near Belen, New Mexico, which is where Tara Calico was abducted. It's also about 100 miles from Elephant Butte, New Mexico, which is where David Parker Ray had his little secret torture laboratory. We didn't put all that together until later. Even though David Parker Ray had died by the time this happened to us, we do believe that there are others out there like him. And whoever abducted Tara has never been caught. Or maybe we came into meth lab territory. But since this happened on an actual highway, rather than a backcountry road, I tend to discount the meth lab theory. Whatever is going on out there, it's not good. So, let's not ever meet, or have anyone else ever meet, these guys. Story 6. Incident that scared the hell out of me as a kid. I posted this in another sub a while back but thought it fit better here. When I was about 7 years old, my father bought a few hundred acres in southern Mississippi, about 1.5 hours west of Mobile, Alabama. He built a small cabin on top of a hill that was in the middle of a large field surrounded by woods. This house was about 5 miles from a paved road. To get to our land, it took nearly 10 minutes of driving down dirt roads from the main highway, which was south of the house. About a quarter mile north from the house, he built a small lake, more like a pond. It was about as long as a football field but wider. To get to the lake from the house, you could take Route A, which was a hard-packed dirt road that was lined with dogwood trees. It was beautiful in the spring. Route B was about 100 yards east of Dogwood Lane, and we named it Vampire Trail because it was always so gloomy. The trees blocked out the sun on the brightest days, and it had a slight decline as you walked toward the lake. I say I walked because this trail was not for vehicles. Thick woods filled the area outside and in between both trails. One morning during the fall, my parents and my little sister had gone to get ice cream and do some shopping. This trip would take them at least an hour or two. I was 10 years old, so I decided to go fishing while listening to Bama play Ole Mississippi. The game was the usual Bama win, so I thought I could ease the boredom of a blowout by fishing in the well-stocked lake. So I carried my pole, small radio, and my small ice chest. I had an Airedale Terrier named Booley that never left my side, and it was on this day I realized how awesome he really was. Onto the lake we went. Picture a large oval, roughly the size of a football field but larger, with an L-shaped pier in the southeast corner. Vampire Lane opened up to a more severe decline to the shore and then the small pier. Across the lake on the west side there was a narrow tree line that separated the shore from Dogwood Lane. The north side of the lake was the dam, and the south ended in thick and swampy woods. Fortunately for me, I realized later. About 5 minutes after I threw out my line and 2 Bama touchdowns later, I got that feeling. It's a feeling I have come to recognize well, and it may have saved my life today. The feeling of being watched by something dangerous. Booley must have felt it too, because a few seconds later I could hear him growling low and staring across the lake to the west, to the tree line that separated Dogwood Lane from the lake. I turned my head in that direction, and almost immediately my eyes lit on what I thought to be a half silhouette of a large man behind a tree. It was too far to make out details, but close enough to be sure of what I was seeing. Almost 5 minutes went by, and right before I scolded myself for an overactive imagination, the half silhouette moved behind a tree slowly. Booley stood and growled louder, and I told him quietly to stop, and I turned my head north towards the dam while keeping my eyes and attention rooted to that tree. Over the next 10 minutes, which felt like hours, I watched while this figure moved slowly from tree to tree, always north and always facing me. The saying, "scared stiff," was something I found to be true. For some reason I thought it important that whoever or whatever it was did not know I was aware. I finally realized that the figure's path was bringing it closer to the dam, which would make its path to me shorter and easier. My paralysis broke, and I casually put down the fishing pole and started walking towards Vampire Lane. As an adult, I was in the Army for 11 years as an MP, but not turning to look over my shoulder during that walk was the hardest thing I have ever done. In my mind's eye, whatever it was screaming across the dam towards me. When I hit the tree line, I broke into a run. As I was running, Booley dashed ahead of me, and my anger turned into admiration as he stopped some 20 yards ahead and faced north until I passed him. He continued this action the entire run home. My dog was watching my back, just epic. Although I can grasp the awesomeness of this now, at the time I was so scared that I was literally sick. Even at such a young age, I knew that a large man watching and trying to creep up on a 10-year-old boy was up to no good. When I reached the cabin, I immediately locked the door and got one of my dad's shotguns as well as his .38 revolver. I sat at the large front window, my eyes glued to both trail openings and the woods between them. My family returned shortly after, and for some reason I did not mention what happened. I never felt safe there again. When me and my friends or my little sister wanted to go anywhere other than the area around the cabin, I made sure my parents were with us. What scares me the most, though, is the fact that our closest neighbors were about 2 miles northwest of us, with thick woods in between as the crow flies. Who or what the hell was watching me from the woods that day? Guess I may never know. I sometimes wish I could go back then, as a grown man with military training as I am now. Booley lived a full life and was put to sleep peacefully as a very old but great dog. The best dog I have ever known. Story 7. Always read the reviews. For background, I am a fairly fit, 22-year-old female. I work for a pretty well-known health club in the northwest of England. I've been on a pretty simple path of self-improvement whilst working part-time and studying at university. Therefore, when my manager asked me if I wanted to do a lifeguard qualification for our poolside, I happily agreed. It was an all-expense-paid trip, so I would never have said no anyway. They paid for my travel, about an hour away from where I was living, but I drove anyway, so they just paid for my petrol, the hotel, food, and the course, which was pretty cool, I thought. The way the course was set out was pretty normal for a lifeguard course, I assume. It was 3 days worth of training. For days off, I returned back home to work, and then I would travel back again for 3 more days, on the 3rd, graduating from the course and becoming a lifeguard. The first 3 days were amazing. I found my hotel pretty easily, and although it was in a dodgy-looking area, I did sleep well and the staff were nothing but helpful. I was hoping to return to the same hotel for the last 3 days. However, the day before I was due to return to do my last 3 days, my manager told me that the hotel was fully booked. He quickly booked me another one which was in the middle of the town center. I looked the hotel up and the exterior was dodgy, but I thought I may as well give it a chance, as it was only for 2 nights. I went to my first day at lifeguard training as normal, when one of the local girls told me the hotel I was about to stay at had no on-site parking. She also mentioned that all the surrounding car parks were only for short stays, maximum 2 hours. And it would be best to leave my car at the training center and she would take me to my hotel and pick me up in the morning to go to training. I thought this was very helpful, thanked her and took her up on her offer. After finishing for the day, I got into her car and she took me to my hotel. She also mentioned that she used to rent near this hotel, which was a small, family-run business and not a chain. It had no room service nor kitchen and therefore pointed me in the right direction to Sainsbury's, McDonald's and Subway. Perfect. Night 1 in the hotel. I walked into the hotel. The lobby seemed nice, although there was construction in all the surrounding rooms. The girl at the front desk, blonde hair, blue eyes, greeted me and began to check me in. She smiled and let me know that I had been upgraded, but she didn't know why. I didn't question it. I was just happy to be in the executive suite. She walked me to my room, which was like a maze. You needed a special key card to get to my set of rooms, the executive suites. This meant no random people could walk through the hallway near my room. I felt safe. Upon entering my room, I was amazed. I have never been in something so classy. The room was massive. On the left there were stairs to the bathroom. Stairs? There was a balcony, a queen-sized bed, a couch, TV with Netflix, and a table full of complimentary water, tea and biscuits. I chilled for a bit and then suddenly realized how hungry I was and thought I should nip to Sainsbury's before it got dark outside. All was good. On the way back from the shop was when it all started to get weird. I returned to the hotel and got to the door which needed the special key to open the doors for the executive suites, and there was a man just standing outside, dressed in a suit. We looked at each other for a moment before I walked past and scanned the door open. I automatically regretted it. The man followed me through. Very closely. Now I'm a very nervous person. I panic at everything. It drives people crazy. And of course I panicked at this. I thought better safe than sorry, and literally ran to my room. Maybe I looked like a crazy person. However, I turned my head slightly to see that the man had actually kept up to me. Very well. I started to weep and opened my door extremely clumsily, threw myself in and slammed the door closed. The weirdest bit was that the man actually looked as though he was about to walk into the room. Weird. Now, you're probably thinking, why didn't you call the front desk? And the truth is, I don't know. Maybe I should have, but with how the story progresses, I know it was the right thing to do by not calling the front desk. I'll explain. Don't worry. I eventually calmed myself down and thought about running myself a bath before Love Island started at 9 p.m. I ran the bath, stripped naked and sat on the toilet to wee, graphic but relevant. I left the bathroom door wide open, because I was in a nice hotel room and why not? I had a very clear view of the front door. As I stand up to flush, I hear a noise, like the sound of the front door opening. I look up to see that it has opened. I ran to the bathroom door and slammed it shut and locked it. I sank to the floor and cried. I turned the bath off so I could listen closely to the room outside the door but heard nothing. I messaged my best friend, who lives in Crete, so even if something did happen she wouldn't have been able to do anything about it. I don't even know why I just thought there was no way this was actually happening, and if I called the police I would just be laughed at. I sat on the floor for half an hour till my friend convinced me it was all in my head and to check. I let her know my hotel name and room number just in case and told her if I didn't reply in 5 minutes, no matter what, to call the police for me. She agreed and I left the bathroom. Everything looked normal. I checked under the bed, the balcony, wardrobe, etc., and everything was fine. No masked murderers. Although, I tried to lock the front door with the manual lock that are normally on hotel room doors but found that there wasn't one. This freaked me out a bit, but I laughed at myself, grabbed one out of the 2 bottles of free water, downed it during Love Island and fell asleep soundly. When I woke up the next day, I got ready quickly because I overslept, grabbed the last bottle of water off the desk and ran to meet the girl who was picking me up for training. I forgot all about the night's events. The last night at the hotel. Now here's where shit gets weirder. I come back relatively early to revise for the assessment the next day. It was about 30 degrees outside and inside the unair-conditioned room. So I stripped to my underwear. I noticed that none of the complimentary waters had been restocked, so I assumed it was maybe just the one-off, considering I didn't pay full price for the room. I revised for maybe 30 minutes, but the heat made me sleepy. I don't even remember falling asleep, but I do remember the sound of the door next to me slam shut. The front door. I felt groggy and didn't open my eyes straight away. When I did, it took my eyes a few seconds to adjust. I brushed it off quickly until I sat up straight. My eyes focused on the table, which was now full of complimentary water. It definitely was not there before. Next to me in bed, a random sock, black ankle sock, that was not mine. One of my socks, that I had put in a pair, was no longer on the floor, but had gone missing altogether, like someone had taken off their own sock and put on mine. My mind automatically thought it had to be staff, and therefore I didn't complain to management. This was not a chain hotel where a creepy employee couldn't be held accountable, but a family-run business. What if I complained to the creep that had been doing this? I barricaded myself into the room and barely slept that night. Upon checkout, an elderly man was at the desk who I had only ever seen in passing. He asked if I liked my room. I tried to be polite and told him yes, despite the weird events, which I began to question myself about again. He told me that my manager had rang the day before I arrived and he decided to give me a quiet room to myself, which he likes to do for the younger girl. He then asked me to leave them a good review. I began to feel uneasy again, but had my lifeguard assessment that day to push it to the back of my mind. I passed with flying colors and drove home. It wasn't till I was sitting in my own bed that the situation hit me. Something wasn't sitting right with me. So, I went on the hotel's TripAdvisor. Something I should have done, or my managers should have done when sending a young girl alone, at the start. 3 separate reviews. Out of the 4 reviews I bothered to read before feeling too sick to continue, 3 contained a warning to women. Men were trying to get into their rooms, and staff would walk in unannounced. Even when they were confronted, the staff would deny it. This was when I knew I had not made what had happened up in my head. People or a person had been coming into my room, whilst I slept, half naked, and stayed for an unknown period of time, stealing my clothing. It still sends chills down my spine just writing this now. I let my managers know who has made a complaint against the company, but so far nothing has come back. I don't know what else to do about the situation. I can attach the screenshot of the reviews if anyone is interested. Story 8. Cabin Man. This is a throwaway account I made after discovering this subreddit and I wanted to share my story, so here it goes. It was about late November in Colorado and I was about 7 or 8, and my father got the idea of taking us all for a weekend to a cabin that he was going to rent. My mother thought it was a great idea for me, my sister, my father, and my mother to bond. So, that's exactly what happened. We rented a cabin for a few days. We took off school on Friday to get a head start on getting there, which I had no issue with. We got there and it was sure cold. Well, it was almost December, so I guess it made sense that it was so cold. Anyway, we got all set up and decided where we'd all sleep. We ate dinner, and then we all got set up for bed and were thinking about what we'd do tomorrow. We got there kind of late, so we couldn't do much on the first day. That night though, I heard noises outside. It sounded kind of like footsteps. I looked out the window and saw nothing, so I figured it must have been an animal. I tried to go back to sleep, then about 15 minutes later I heard it again. I woke my sister up, which she was about 11 at the time, and she heard it as well. We both walked over to the window and saw something out there. We weren't quite sure what it was. We decided it'd be best for it not to see us, so we went back to sleep. I had a hard time sleeping that night, and so did my sister. But when we eventually woke up, my mother was inside making breakfast and my father was outside. I asked my mom if I could go outside with my dad, and she told me sure, while my sister stayed inside and waited for my mother to finish breakfast. I walked outside and my father was talking to some man. A short, chubby man. He had a shaved head and was wearing a veteran cap. He looked really nervous too, for some reason. He was sweating a lot as well, even though it was freezing outside. I walked over to him and my father looked at me and said, "Oh, this is my son," and told him my name. The man looked at me and said, "Nice to meet you, kid, my name's Patrick." He smiled and looked at me. I smiled and greeted him back, and it may have been rude at the time but I was just a kid, and asked him, "You look kinda scared, are you alright?" And he kind of coughed and replied with, "Yeah, I'm fine, just went through shell shock. I'm a veteran," he said, as I couldn't tell already with the cap he was wearing. He seemed normal then. My father seemed to really like this guy, and I liked him at first too. He told my father he had also rented a cabin with his family and that they were really close to us, so he decided to introduce himself. My father invited him inside for breakfast and he stayed, and it was normal. I went outside to play after that with my father and Patrick. While outside, I fell and scraped my knee and started crying. My father was inside at the time, a bad time for him to be inside. My mother was calling for him and he ran inside while I was out there with Patrick. Patrick ran over to me and told me to come with him to his cabin because he had band-aids. I agreed and went with him. I wasn't a very smart kid. I went with Patrick. We talked about what I liked doing and I told him about video games that I played and stuff like that. Then things got weird. He asked me what shoe size I was and how old I am. I didn't know what my shoe size was. I told him, but I told him my age. He just kind of chuckled and said something along the lines of, "Good to know." Also, his cabin was nowhere near ours. It was way back. It took about 20 to 25 minutes to walk there. I was tired and there was no point in getting the band-aid anymore, but I still decided to keep going since I had walked so long. We entered the cabin. He told me to go in first, so I did. As soon as I walked in, I realized something. There was nobody in there. No family. I asked him where his family was, and he didn't answer, pretending like he didn't hear. He locked the door. I then got kind of frightened. He told me, "I'll be right back with the band-aid, kiddo." He walked into the kitchen and pulled one out from somewhere, and then walked back and told me to have a seat and he'd put it on. I sat down and he put it on me. He also held my leg with his other hand and rubbed up and down it and told me, "You're rather muscular, kid." I like that. I kind of got scared and immediately stood up. He asked me what was wrong and I told him nothing and that my leg was feeling much better. I then thought my parents must be worried sick about me and that I should hurry back. He insisted that I stayed a little longer and ate there. I didn't want to, but I was alone and if I ran I don't think I could find my way back to my cabin. The door was locked too, so I just agreed and decided to eat with him and get it over with fast. He asked me how much I weighed, and I guessed around 73 pounds. He then had a smile go across his face. He nodded and said, "Perfect weight." I asked him what the perfect weight was and he just kept smiling. I was really weirded out and asked him if I could go. He told me no and that things were just getting started and I shouldn't miss out on the fun. He had such a weird tone when he said that too. I then heard a big bang come from the bedroom. It was a closed door. Patrick stood up and looked kinda angry. He walked into the room and shut the door behind him. I then heard him yelling, "Did I fucking tell you that you could move? No, stay the fuck where you are. I have fucking company," or something like that. He then walked out with a smile on his face, and shut the door slowly. Sorry about that, it was just my wife. She's really sick and not allowed to be near visitors today. He was smiling while saying that. I wanted to go. I then looked around the room and noticed there were clothes everywhere, and it was really messy. He must have been living out of here. At that moment, his wife walked out of the room. I'm hungry, she said. He looked pissed. Get back in there, he said. His wife was extremely pale and looked like she had been crying a lot. She was sniffing and had red circles around her eyes. She looked at me, then walked back in the room. I asked him where his kids were. He didn't answer. He told me he had kids' clothes that he wanted me to try on. That was the last straw. I had to get out of that situation and I didn't know how. I started crying and then he hugged me. He told me, "It'll be okay, little one, nothing is going to happen. Just try on these clothes." He walked in the back room. I thought that was the perfect time for me to leave. I unlocked his door and tried to leave as quietly as I could. I didn't care if I got lost anymore. I didn't want to take any more chances with Patrick. If that even was his name. I had a feeling he had been lying. He lied about having kids, so who knows what else. I was in the woods trying to find my way back. I was still close to his house, close enough to hear shouting. I heard him yelling stuff to his wife. Things along the lines of, "Where the fuck did he go?" and "I knew I shouldn't have left him alone, you probably let him leave." I could have sworn I heard him call her whore and bitch a couple times. Then it happened. I stopped in my tracks. I heard footsteps. I went and hid behind a tree and looked in his direction. He was outside and seemed to be looking for me. I was far enough away to where I could barely see him, but I could tell he was looking for something. He then stepped out in the forest and heard him shouting, "Hey kid, it's okay. You can come back now. You don't have to try on the clothes, and I have toys back in my cabin, all you have to do is come back." I then ran. I ran as fast as I could in a straight line in hopes to find somebody in my family. I was running away and I thought I heard shouting, but I didn't stop to hear it. Then after about an hour of running, I saw a cabin. My cabin. I ran to it. My father was outside looking around, looking for me. I ran up to him crying and told him Patrick wasn't a good guy and that he was really weird and was touching my legs and stuff. My father immediately called the person he rented the cabin from, and he had said that nobody had rented that cabin. My father looked at me and told me to never follow any stranger ever again. We immediately left that day and asked for a refund for the next day. The guy renting them out apologized. The man having the cabin rentals called the police, and the police went back there and checked the cabin, and there was nobody back there, not even his wife. His clothes and belongings were still there, is what they told us. Nothing really happened after that. They asked questions and left. They never called us or told us anything about him ever again. Patrick most likely wasn't his real name, and he probably wasn't a veteran. I just want to know what happened to him and his wife, and how he even got a wife in the first place, and how and why he lived back in that cabin. He seemed to have lived there for a while. I guess he left because he figured the police would be coming after him because he didn't rent the cabin. So many questions that will never get answered. I'm just glad that it's all over, and I hope I never have to see the cabin man again. Story, mine. Orange Tent Girl. I am a 33-year-old white female from Los Angeles. 3 years ago my boyfriend and I, as planned for 5 years, turned 30, sold everything we owned, including my car, took his Trailblazer and decided to just travel around the States and Canada. I guess you could call us backpackers, as we tend to chase good weather, find a state park and backcountry hike into the wilderness for days at a time. My brother likes to joke that we are anti-establishment hippies. We don't necessarily live off the grid, but between the two of us we have one prepaid phone we use for emergencies or checking in with family and friends, and one MacBook which I use for work. I'm a freelance writer/content creator and I am on retainer with a robotics company. I mostly write boring white papers or web content. The whole point of our living situation is to live debt-free and have as few bills as possible. I only use free Wi-Fi, so 1 to 2 times a week we have to go to a city with a Starbucks. This background info is only important so you know more about who we are and how simply we live. Neither of us is involved in social media, and know very little of Reddit or Instagram or use any apps. Because our phone isn't a smartphone, we don't even text. Last summer we decided to do some backcountry hiking in Arkansas. It's one of those states you don't ever really hear about other hikers visiting, but we read that it had some beautiful natural landscape. It does. The rules at this particular park were pretty lax. We didn't need a permit. There were a few basic laws/guidelines, but there was no check-in needed. We had all the basics and had planned to do a 6-day hike. 3 in, 3 out. The whole time we were out there we didn't see or hear another soul, but on day 1, we were prepping to move off trail and find a camping spot as it was getting near dusk. Half a mile off trail is usually the standard for us. We took what looked like kind of an animal trail, and about half a mile out we saw a green, 2-person tent. It was almost camouflaged in the foliage, so we came on it almost by accident. Some backpackers prefer privacy, others are more social. We're the more social type. We've had some great experiences camping near other backpackers, sharing stories, food, and a joint or two. We were around 30 yards away from the tent. It was zipped closed, so my boyfriend shouted a greeting to make our presence known. No movement and no sound. We assumed green tent guy either wasn't around or didn't want to be bothered, so we started off in a new direction to get some distance between us. We camped. Never heard a peep. We moved along the next morning, completely forgetting about green tent guy, until nearing the end of day 5 on our trek back. We were again looking for a spot to camp off the trail when we came up on the green tent again. This isn't that unusual, but normally backcountry hikers keep moving, so we really weren't expecting it. The tent flap was open, so my boyfriend yells his greeting again and nothing. My boyfriend wants to go check it out, saying, "It's weird, and maybe someone is hurt." I didn't like the idea from the get-go, because even though we hadn't had any bad experiences personally, we'd heard enough stories from other backpackers about hermits and mountain men that want privacy, carry guns, etc. But my boyfriend assured me we'd be fine, and if all else fails, offer him some weed to keep the peace and we'd go on our way. As soon as we get within 20 yards of the place, the smell of decomposition is intense. My boyfriend has been hailing his greeting over the last 20 yards, and once the smell hits him, he stops and turns to me and says, "What if we find a dead body?" My skin crawled. I was immediately afraid. I've never seen a dead body before and don't want to. The closer we got to the tent, the worse the smell got. I knew for sure we were going to walk in and see some old camper's rotting corpse. What we found was worse than that. Outside the tent was a dead doe's legs, all 4 of them, covered in flies. It looked like the legs had been cut most of the way and then ripped off the rest of the way. It was a mess. Inside was the body and head of the deer, but the middle portion was swaddled in a blue fleece blanket that was blood-soaked at the bottom where the legs used to be. It was laying on its side, bottom facing the tent entry. The tail had been cut off, and the anus/vagina was covered in dried blood and agape. Like something had been penetrating it. The same with its mouth. The bottom portion was bent down at a scary broken-looking angle. The tent was open, so we could see everything without having to go inside. Not that we would have anyway, because at this point the smell was almost debilitating. There was a dirty, almost empty clear bottle of Jergens baby oil and a stained green and white fringed kitchen towel. That was it. I immediately started crying and begged him to go. All he could muster was, "Oh fuck," and we turned and ran. We ran to the trail and jogged down it for as far as we could go until dusk was fully on us and we had to set up camp. We didn't go very far off the trail and neither of us slept. We didn't start a fire or use headlamps after full dark. We just sat up whispering to each other, going over and over what we had just seen. Every little noise startled us. It was like our brains were on red alert. I kept thinking any moment a dead deer rapist would come back to his tent, see our footprints or something, know we were there and track us back to our tent. I've never been so scared in my entire life. Just before dawn we tore down and started out. My boyfriend stopped at the ranger station on our way out of the park to report what we had seen. The ranger was a young guy around our age, and he looked as freaked out by our story as we were telling it. He wrote most of it down and my boyfriend showed him on a map approximately where it had been. He asked if we knew how the deer was killed, and at that point we hadn't even thought about it. We just assumed it had been shot, but because of the blanket we didn't see a wound, but we weren't exactly giving it an autopsy either. We have since shortened our backcountry hikes to a maximum of 4 days. We've also been a lot less eager to call out to other campsites, and have never approached another unmanned tent again. Story 10. Babysitting gets creepy. I began babysitting at 13 to earn extra money to spend on horribly embarrassing things like Fall Out Boy CDs. I would almost always work for my dad's clients, lawyer, and get referred by word of mouth. I was babysitting for this one family who had a little girl, 9, and a little boy, 7. The parents seemed okay, if a tad crotchety, giving me a full schedule to follow and, jokingly, threatening to beat any boy who might mysteriously show up after they left. It felt cruel for them to accuse me of even knowing a boy, given I basically looked like an overgrown baby with frizzy hair at that age. Almost immediately after the parents leave, the little girl sings in a creepy high-pitched voice, "We're all alone now." Right-o, cue the Shining soundtrack. "I know," the little boy chimed in, "let's play rape." Looking back now, I know the kid probably just heard the term on TV, knew the word was shocking, and said it just for a reaction. I totally bought into it at the time, sputtering wide-eyed and changing the subject quickly. These kids were hell for the next hour. I wouldn't let them watch South Park on the TV because their parents did not seem like the type to allow their precious 7- and 9-year-old to watch a show like that. As soon as I said no, the little girl said casually, "Oh, that's fine, we'll just go play PlayStation in the family room. Feel free to watch it out here." Lol, nope, I knew exactly where that was headed. I said they could watch any other TV show in the living room while I made them dinner. The parents had left instructions to make them sandwiches. I could handle that. Before I had even got out the bread, I heard a massive crash. It seems like the little girl has broken a glass. Too tang and pissed, but ultimately with no way to punish her, I cleaned it up while these two incredibly weird kids watched with wide eyes. Dumping the broken glass in the trash, I went back to making the sandwiches. I'm a vegetarian, so while the kids had chicken, I made a simple salad for myself. Just as I was finishing, the little boy screamed out in what, even from my hypervigilant state as an accountable teenage babysitter, sounded like a pantomime of pain. Nonetheless, I ran over to the couch in the living room to check on him. "My ankle," he howled, dramatically flopping back into the couch. While I tried to figure out how he had hurt his ankle, the little girl slipped out of the room. Peripherally, I was aware of this, but didn't really pay it any mind, focused on this little boy pretending to be in pain. He kept saying, "I went to stand but it hurt too much, I don't know," over and over until his eyes suddenly flicked to just behind me, where I could see the little girl standing with a perturbing smile on her face. He was miraculously healed. Yeah. Praise the Lord. At this point, I was just thinking these kids were really weird, craved attention a little too much, and probably needed more parental involvement. Whatever, I was 13, and that $60 was only 4 hours away. I set out the sandwiches for the two to eat at the dining table, went to get a soda, and returned. After pouring soda for the both of them, I realized they hadn't even taken a bite of their sandwiches yet. I asked them what they were waiting for. They smiled, "For you to take a bite of yours." I am so glad I had a gut feeling to open the top part of the bread of my sandwich. Because when I did, I saw glass. Broken glass. Broken glass that I'd put in the trash. I stared in horror at the two little kids staring at me with menacing twin grins. I lost it, shouting, "Are you serious? At the very least, you could have really injured my mouth. What's wrong with you two?" Instead of crying or apologizing or pretending to be ashamed or confused, these two little fuckers began laughing. Not like kids. It was too low. It wasn't that silly, free laugh kids laugh. It was low and threatening. I'll never forget that noise. My immediate reaction was, these kids are too young to be laughing like that. I called my older sister, 17, at the time, cried about what had happened, and she came and took over for me. We left the house with chills after the parents arrived. I never babysat for those two again. What I can't get past is the level of premeditation that went into sprinkling that broken glass in my sandwich, and the totally remorseless way they responded to my getting upset. They were unlike any two kids I've ever met before. Story 11. Satan's B&B. A story on here reminded me of the time some friends and I stayed in what had to be the third most shady hotel in Vegas, which, for Vegas, is saying something, when I managed to inadvertently traumatize the entirety of my company as I recounted what I considered to be an amusing childhood story. The hotel itself was a bit of a nightmare, as everything was bolted down and none of the doors locked, but I digress. I decided that this would be a good place to put it, given the input of my buddies. Sorry that it's long. The story itself is about my family's run-in with Satanists on a trip to upstate New York. Though the growing expressions of disbelief and horror on my companions' faces assured me that the story was not, as I had previously considered, funny, In any case, what follows is completely true and everyone present swears by this narrative. When I was 5 years of age, we took a road trip, as was common in our family, up to upstate New York to see my grandmother on my father's side, as well as to tour around the countryside a bit. There we were in the rural upstate, away from the region in which my grandmother actually lives, and we were planning on staying in a bed and breakfast my father had booked ahead of time. It had been an unexpectedly long drive due to weather complications, and when we found the B&B in question, we were all quite tired. We went up to the door to check in, and a woman missing her 2 front teeth on both jaws answered. She invited us in but warned us that they didn't have any room for the night. They were booked solid. My father protested that he had made the arrangements in advance, but she said she knew another hotel that had vacancy just up the way and she would give them a call, and she assured him they would offer the same rates. But first, she insisted on showing my parents around, as her husband was an artist and she wanted to show them his studio and famous artwork. We were all invited in, but after seeing the first few pieces of naked women, missing their front teeth, bound or being tortured in various ways, my parents opted to leave the kids outside with Grandma. Apparently most of the rooms were full to the ceiling with similarly foreboding images of dead or dying people with the occasional sculpture of menacing animals. My parents were a bit creeped out, but just figured these people were eccentric and they had dodged a bullet by ending up somewhere else. We all waited out back while the woman called her friend, beside a pit containing what could have been nothing other than an altar, covered with pentagrams. My mother mentioned that it seemed strange that not only had they not met the husband, who was supposedly there somewhere, having toured the entire house, but that there hadn't been a single sign of life or piece of luggage suggesting that anyone else was actually staying in any of the guest bedrooms in this supposedly fully booked B&B. A side note that's probably not worth mentioning, but that I found strange when my mother brought it up while telling me the story later, as I was 5 at the time. A lot of this story has been narrated to me after the fact by different people who were involved on some level, was that we stopped by a park to stretch our legs at some point before proceeding to the next place. The storm was closing in on us and my parents wanted to be sure we had zero energy upon arrival. While in this park, my mother claims that one of us found and brought to her a small necklace with a pendant on it. The pendant itself was a pentagram on one side, with a Third Reich symbol on the other. My mother took it away and put it in her purse. We arrived at the next bed and breakfast to be greeted by a different woman, also conspicuously missing her 2 front teeth, upper and lower. It was about this time that my grandmother mentioned that she had read a lot of articles recently about tourists being killed by some cult of Satanists or some such in this area. She tended to tell a lot of tall tales, so I think my parents kind of rolled their eyes and dismissed it, but they made a point to mention it later. The storm was now upon us. We were all exhausted and there was nowhere else to stay that we could find anywhere near there. My dad decided we would make do with whatever they had to offer. What they had to offer was a slightly renovated barn. During the bustle of moving our luggage in, the woman kept inviting my brother, 3, and I into the house, saying she had some sweets and wouldn't we like to meet her kiddies? She made it clear, however, that my parents were not welcome into the house because it was too messy and she would be embarrassed. We were herded away into the barn and told not to talk to the lady. Once inside, my father, who was by this time a bit creeped out, went about checking the beds and securing the one-room barn unit. The windows had no coverings whatsoever and the doors had no locks. We placed pillows from the couches in the window frames and my dad grabbed a dresser against one wall to block the door. When he went to move the dresser, he discovered it was on wheels, which were completely silent. He also noticed that the wall behind it moved a little when he shifted the dresser. When he scrutinized the wall, he found a seam. He pushed on the wall and it gave way, 2 invisible doors opening outwards into the night, and just outside was a dark-colored van which had been backed up to the opening. Livid, my dad went about rearranging all the furniture in the room, stacking the heaviest against the outward swinging doors and moving the mobile dresser with various loud objects behind it against the main door. When he had completed this and we were all starting to settle down, at about 11 p.m., the woman brought us fresh-baked blueberry muffins. Now, as I mentioned before, I don't remember much of this trip, but this is one element I have a vivid recollection of. With the inclement weather and the rush to find a place to stay, complemented by the lack of restaurants, nigh anything, in the area, we hadn't had what one might consider a proper meal. When you're 5, dinner is very important. The muffins were freshly baked and smelled heavenly. I wanted one more than I wanted anything else in the world. However, presuming, probably correctly, that they were poisoned or something was seriously wrong about them, since this entire thing was beginning to feel like a horror movie, my mother absolutely forbade us from even going near them. She put them on a high shelf and sent us to bed. I was so angry. I went to bed hungry and irritable. Only 2 things happened that night that I can recall. My parents slept very lightly, when at all, as you might imagine. They claimed they kept hearing talking outside. My sister woke us all with a blood-curdling scream around 1 a.m. for reasons unknown, as she was usually a very quiet baby. When my parents got up and milled for about an hour trying to get her back to bed, my mom noticed something on the wall as she was walking her around and called my father over. What I would later learn was that the picture hanging to one side of the door that during the daylight seemed to be logs in a recently extinguished fire pit and a tranquil forest scene was by night unmistakably burning corpses with a hooded smoky figure looming over them. We got up the next morning, packed up early and waited for the lady to get up so we could pay and leave. While my parents were packing the bags, the woman came around back and gave both my brother and I small wooden cats carved into the form of napkin holders, each a different color, that she had written little notes on. As my father was paying after loading us into the car, my mom began kicking the gravel around on the drive absent-mindedly. The woman came over to say goodbye and waved to us with her gapped grin, and my mother noticed that she was trying to discreetly recover the tiles that she was uncovering under the gravel. Before driving off, my mother got back out of the car and uncovered one of the tiles, and she claims it was the same pentagram with Third Reich symbol within it that she had seen a similar version of in the park, prompting her to notice, as we drove away, that the necklace was no longer in her purse. The likelihood of it simply falling out of the purse pocket she had placed it in was, as she put it, quite unlikely. People listening to this story seemed appalled at the fact that I still have that little wooden cat that the nice lady gave me, sitting in my bedroom. I know this all sounds very strange, but I can only assure you that it matches well with my memory of the events, and all of the adults who were there tell the same story, and 2 of them are not known to extrapolate at all. Personally, I'm glad it's just a weird story we look back on with confusion, and that nothing stranger happened that night. Story 12. The Tent in the Trees. This story takes place in August of 2013, in the mountains of southern Oregon. I am a USAF Security Forces airman, military policeman. My girlfriend was at work, and as a swelteringly hot day began to turn into thunderstorms, my buddy Nick, another military cop, and I decided to go explore some back roads and get out of the heat in town. Southern Oregon is crisscrossed with logging roads, some actively used, and many totally forgotten and grown over. Nick and I spent many of our days off starting on roads that we knew, finding roads we didn't know, driving for hours into the mountains, eventually navigating back to paved roads. On this particular day, with storm clouds building over the mountains, we set off on a road we had never been on, and began the drive into the mountains. After driving for around an hour, we hadn't seen nor heard any signs of other people in the woods. We rounded a bend in the thick fir woods, and emerged in a meadow that was totally surrounded by thick aspen groves. The meadow was perfectly flat and eerily still. We both noticed the strange stillness almost immediately, no birds, hardly any insect noise, no squirrels, and certainly no other people. On the far side of the meadow, right at the edge of the tree line, there was a picnic table. The table was very odd, however. It was painted a bright orange, and was much larger than a typical picnic table in a park. Remarking on this, Nick drove through the meadow to get a closer look. I remember being apprehensive as we approached. The whole scenario was exceptionally strange. The overall silence of the aspen grove was unsettling. Also, It was nearly impossible to see far into the trees as aspens grow extremely close together. When we parked by the table, I hopped out of the passenger seat of the truck to check it out. I'm not very tall, only about 5 feet 5 inches. Regardless, the table was ridiculously oversized and practically unusable. The seats were nearly at chest level, meaning I would have to climb up to even sit on them. As I was looking at the table, Nick called me over to the truck, and I noticed he was looking back into the aspens. At first, I couldn't see what he was looking at, but then I noticed a splash of color that was completely out of place in the thick trees. A small one-man tent was set back in the trees, about 50 feet from the strange table. I had an initial feeling of dread, and felt certain that there was someone in the tent, and if we could see the tent, they could see us. There were no campgrounds in this area, no people, no main roads for miles. Surely someone camping so remotely would be, at the very least, a strange person. However, as we observed the tent, we didn't see any movement or hear any sounds coming from it. Nick suggested I call out. I didn't want to, but I did. "Hey, anyone in there?" I yelled. No reply. Feeling completely on edge, Nick and I thought about driving away and leaving this strange area. But we began to fear the worst. What if there was a body in the tent? What if somebody had gotten kidnapped? Foolish, I know, but we thought it all the same. After some debate, we decided to have Nick turn the truck around to drive away from the camp. Should we need to leave in a hurry, he would be waiting behind the wheel. With my heart pounding, I started walking through the trees towards the tent. I was totally keyed up with my senses on full alert. When I reached the campsite, several things struck me as odd. Backpacks were scattered all over. No fire had been built, no wood collected. The tent was literally full of backpacks and women's clothing. Full of dread, I turned to leave and tell Nick what I had seen. As I left, I heard Nick start yelling, "Let's go! Let's get the fuck out of here!" Not knowing why he was yelling, I ran back to the truck. When I broke out of the trees, I saw a beat-up old Ford Taurus on the road, blocking us from leaving the meadow. I immediately leapt into the passenger seat, and Nick floored the gas pedal. The car was occupied by 2 men, a third person was laying against the window in the back. As we drove across the meadow, the driver attempted to block us from the road, but Nick drove around them and accelerated the way we had come from. I looked back and saw the car attempting to turn around on the narrow road. Nick drove like a madman, and though I was honestly terrified that they would catch up, we hit the highway without seeing the car again. I still do not know if the person in the back was male or female. I called the state police, and they promised to send a trooper out to check out the scene. However, I received a call the next day from a trooper stating that the campsite, the backpacks, and the women's clothing were all gone, though he could tell people had been in the area. The strange table was still by the thick aspen grove. I have not returned to the area, and do not intend to. Story 13. God said I belonged to him. This happened 2 years ago, on the day of my 28th birthday. I was working at a small, double-sided, drive-through only coffee stand about 30 minutes outside of Seattle. I'd been working there for about a year at this point, and was always scheduled to work the closing shift during the week and the opening shift on the weekends. In the 7 years I had worked as a barista at this point, I had never been confronted with a situation that challenged my feeling of security while working alone. And despite having heard numerous stories over the years of other baristas in the area who had suffered violent or dangerous interactions with some of their customers, I considered myself fortunate not to have to place myself among them. Unfortunately, on this day, that would change. Thursday, November 7th, 6:45 p.m. I was preparing to close the stand at 7 p.m. like usual. It was very rare that I would have customers come through the stand past 6:30, and because of this, I felt myself jump slightly when I looked up from the espresso machine I was cleaning to see a man standing behind the glass of the closed window beside me. Adding to my alarm was the fact he made no noise whatsoever as he approached the stand, and made no attempt to grab my attention once he got there. Instead, he stood behind the window in complete silence, his mouth awkwardly fixed into an unnatural-looking smile. At first I wasn't even sure he was a customer at all, considering the idea he may be a part of the large group of transients and homeless that were known at that time to reside in the area and who occasionally came up to the stand to ask for free coffee or water. For safety reasons, I typically refrain from serving walk-up customers after dusk, but because he now knew I had seen him, the rules of good customer service required I at least acknowledge the fact he was there. So, reluctantly, I decided to serve him. He introduced himself as Ivan. He was around my age, seemed reasonably well kept in the sense his clothing and overall appearance looked pretty clean, and despite a slight Eastern European accent, his English was very good. His eyes, however, were utterly unnerving. His gaze made my stomach feel uneasy. Immediately my intuition was alerting me that something about this individual was very wrong. Every red flag possible was beginning to show in my mind, and I could not shake the deep, almost overwhelming sense of darkness that I felt coming from this person. There was an evil in him that I couldn't ignore, though I would soon find out exactly why I was feeling this way. After greeting him as politely as I could manage despite my growing hesitations, I began preparing my machine to make him a drink. However, he didn't seem to know what he wanted to order, and I asked him twice what I could get started for him before I silently recognized the fact he was very likely not here for the coffee. Eventually, he abandoned ordering altogether and instead directed our interaction towards small talk. He asked me where I was from, how long I'd been working at this stand, etc. I answered each of these questions with short, abrupt answers, hoping my tone and clear lack of engagement would convey the fact I wasn't interested in continuing any further conversation, since he was not a paying customer and because I was about to close. After a long pause, he asked slowly, "So, do you have a boyfriend?" Annoyed, I replied curtly. At this point, I was completely ready to end our interaction, so I told him that I needed to finish closing up so that I could go home. Upon hearing this, he walked away from the window he'd been standing at, mentioning in his dissent that he is looking forward to seeing me again very soon. A minute or so passed and he was out of sight. Yet my gut told me that he was not, however, far away. I could feel his dark energy nearby, and I knew he was watching me from somewhere beyond my line of vision. Cautiously, I closed up the stand, locked the doors and windows, walked to my car and drove home. By the following day, I had all but forgotten the encounter I'd had with that guy, and went to work as usual. 7 p.m. rolls around and once again, I'm just about to end my shift and close the stand. I'm nearly finished closing out the register when a brief moment of movement catches my eye from outside the window on the opposite side of the stand. I turn my head toward the area in question and there, in full view of both me and the security cameras, stood the guy from yesterday. My stomach sank quicker than I knew previously to be possible, and I was immediately very aware of how cold it was inside of that stand. He smiled at me with a predatory-like grin, waved, and then proceeded to pull open the closed window in front of him, instead of waiting for me to cross the small distance within the stand that stood between us and open it for him, as I usually would. And although he didn't present himself aggressively, there was something incredibly threatening about his choosing to do that. It left me feeling helplessly, hopelessly unsafe in that moment, and that was not a feeling I was familiar with or, as I learned, particularly fond of. Once I was finally able to bring myself back into a present state of mind again, I cleared my throat and told him as firmly as possible that I was off the clock and wouldn't be able to make anything for him as my machine was already cleaned and my register closed out for the day. His smile widened further as he replied, "It's okay. I didn't come to get the coffee. I came for you." Upon hearing this, I noticed a shift in the energy building between us. The fear I'd previously been overcome with now made a sudden and jolting transition into a redlining level of irritation. "I don't care what you came for," I told him as sternly as I could manage. "It's going to have to wait until tomorrow, because I fucking closed." At this, he chuckled a bit before finally raising both his hands in an indication of surrender, saying, all right, fair enough." His smile disappeared. His eyes became even more focused on me, his gaze intensified. "Then I will see you tomorrow," he said, in a way that felt less like a statement and more like a threat. I swallowed hard, and once he was out of view, I rushed to the window and slammed it shut, throwing the lock into place. Again, despite not being able to visibly confirm his presence nearby, I knew that he was there, and I could feel his eyes fixated upon me. I left the stand quickly and got into my car to drive home. This time, however, he remained heavily on my mind for the rest of the night, robbing me entirely of any sleep at all. The following morning was a Saturday, so per my usual schedule, I got up insanely early to work the 5 a.m. opening shift. I arrived at the stand at 10 minutes to 5, and for the first few hours of my shift everything was as it would normally be. 8:30 rolls around and it's now, finally, no longer freezing and dark outside, as the November mornings here tend to be. The sun had broken through the clouds and was steadily burning them off. As I was admiring the weather out the window of the stand, I noticed a familiar truck approaching. As it neared closer, I recognized it as my ex-boyfriend, Jonathan. I found this exceptionally odd, as he and I were not currently on very friendly terms, due to his cheating that ended our relationship about 6 months earlier. He pulled up slowly to the ledge of the open window I was occupying, and I asked him skeptically what he was doing here. "I'm sure I'm probably not someone you were wanting to see today, I know, but I just wanted to come by and wish you a happy birthday and see how you're doing." Just as I was about to thank him for the birthday wishes and inform him that no, indeed he isn't someone I'd wanted to see that day, I was still pretty hurt from his cheating, I noticed someone about 100 yards away, approaching the stand on foot. It was Ivan. I whispered quickly to Jonathan that I needed him to stay here with me, even if another customer pulls in for service behind him, until the guy who just walked up is gone. I could tell he was able to register the fear in my eyes, and he agreed immediately to stay. I brought as much focus into my demeanor as I could manage at that time and turned to face the window on the opposite side of the stand, just as Ivan approached it. I walked slowly over to him and noticed right away that he'd been crying, his eyes were bloodshot and a few tears dripped slowly down his cheeks. Disregarding his obvious emotional state, I informed him he needed to leave, as I was not going to serve him. Before my statement reached its conclusion, however, he cut my words off abruptly. "I don't need this anymore. You can have it." As he said this, he threw what I later came to recognize as his Russian passport into the stand through the open window. I picked it up, puzzled, and with a mix of both caution and disinterest I asked him why he would no longer be needing it. "I just won't." I allowed his words to hang heavily between us while I attempted to make sense in my mind of what a gesture like this might mean, if anything at all, before I felt a strong bite of dread inside my chest. The fear crept slowly into my throat before finally escaping past my lips in an audible gasp, bringing Ivan the confirmation he'd been hoping for that I understood what was about to happen here. No guest to a foreign country would willingly discard or abandon their passport unless they intended to see to completion an act of absolute finality. In an effort to sever the nonverbal conversation taking place within the locked gaze Ivan and I currently had on one another, I glanced over my shoulder at Jonathan, who now had a "what the fuck is going on?" look at his face. In an instant he recognized the desperate, pleading fear in my eyes. This caused his own expression to quickly change to one of panicked urgency as he attempted to understand what had just taken place between this stranger and myself. As I turned back to Ivan and noticed immediately that his crying had stopped. His tears were now replaced with a look of what I can only describe as complete and utter insanity. This is the point where the dynamics of our interaction shifted indefinitely. "God came to me last night in my dreams," he began slowly. "He told me you will be my wife. You're my wife. You are mine. You are for me." A sickening, sadistic smile curled the corners of his mouth up in such a way it was almost physically painful to witness. My heart began throwing itself violently against the inside of my chest as adrenaline surged through my system. "You are my wife," he stated again. "You are my wife, and now you come with me. Right now." At this, he planted his hands firmly onto the ledge of the window that stood before him and began to lift himself onto it. Realizing now that he was attempting to crawl through the window and into the stand, I practically threw myself across the small distance between him and I and quickly slammed the window shut, locking it. He pushed his weight back down off the ledge, paused, and then proceeded to give me a look that made me truly understand the meaning of having one's blood run cold. I felt the inside of me begin to quiver in a way I'd never felt before. An anxious vibration that was working its way throughout my entire body. This was not over yet, I understood this. At this, Ivan offered me a quick wink and began to move with obvious purpose toward the back of the stand. Soon I could hear a faint but distinguished beep, 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 beep of buttons being punched on the electronic keypad that secured the lock on the back door. Ivan was trying to get through the only actual entrance to the stand. In my mind, I knew there was no way he would ever manage to guess the 4-number code, and dismissed any arising concern that he would manage to gain entry. Not going to be that easy, I said under my breath, though I was unsure if I truly believed that. A sudden realization I'd spoken far too soon arrived like a dead weight thrown directly at my gut. The dread that followed what I heard next is something I will never forget. It slammed itself violently into my present state of mind, and with so much force that I almost fell back a few steps. Adrenaline immediately overtook my system in its entirety, and in an instant my vision tunneled itself. As I heard the fateful sound of the electronic keypad indicating a successful code entry, followed by the loud and heavy thunk of the steel deadbolt retreating quickly back into the door, all I could see was the door in front of me. Nothing else. It was as if there were a glaring spotlight illuminating that door and the evil that was about to walk through it. All else around me to fall into darkness. Time felt as if it had stopped entirely. I no longer had a sense of it, or of the space around me in which I currently occupied. As the door began to slowly push open from the outside, I could hear an almost deafening scream resonate powerfully throughout the walls of the stand, expelled solely by a force of fear. As I stood there completely paralyzed, I bore witness to the largest knife I've ever seen enter through the opening door first, followed by Ivan's firmly gripped hand around it. It was only then that I realized the scream I was hearing was my own. As Ivan passed the remainder of his body through the opening of the back door and into the stand, my scream suddenly silenced itself. Before I continue any further, let me just say that until you personally experience a situation that demands you to access your fight or flight response, you have no idea what that response is going to ultimately be. The type of fear that's required to trigger this defense mechanism in the first place is more than most people ever realize. How you will react to it will be involuntary. In this moment, I recognized the simple fact that regardless of whatever it is this guy has planned for me here today, I intended to survive it. And not simply survive, but I intended to execute a lesson this guy clearly needed to learn. Never underestimate someone's capability to persevere, or the fight that drives them. Remembering at this that Jonathan was still in his truck on the other side of the stand, I ran to the window and screamed desperately through the now closed and locked panel of glass, "Jonathan! He's got a fucking knife!" Jonathan's eyes grew huge, and he threw open the driver's side door and flew from his truck towards the back of the building. Then, in the furthest corner of my vision, I caught sight of a dark, looming presence entering into the space of the small interior of the stand. Ivan, now standing no further than 10 feet from me, reeked of an evil that overtook every inch of space within this small building we now occupied together. It made the air so heavy around me that breathing started to become difficult. It felt thick and toxic in my lungs, nearly causing me to choke. As my struggle to breath increased, Ivan began to close the few feet of space still between us by taking slow, taunting steps in my direction. His knife was gripped firmly in his hand, which rested at his side, but the look he had on his face at that moment was so intense that it felt as if it were made of its own blade. He used his eyes to cut into me deeply over and over again, and spoke softly through the visual violence, "You are my wife. You are my wife." Ivan ultimately only managed to take a total of 3 steps toward me before I saw an arm being thrown around his neck from behind. As I stood there in a state of paralysis due to fear, I watched as Jonathan pulled Ivan back by the neck with so much force his feet flew out from beneath him. Suddenly both Ivan and Jonathan were on the ground right outside the door, with Jonathan securing Ivan in a headlock that proved nearly impossible to break away from. Jonathan yelled strict instructions to Ivan not to move, not a single muscle, or he would choke the fucking life out of him. Surprisingly, Ivan remained completely still, never once making any signs of resistance. Jonathan kicked the knife away from his reach and told me to pick it up, secure it, and call the cops. It would feel like hours before the cops arrived, thanks to the massive amount of adrenaline still in my system, though in reality, it was really only a few minutes. Soon, the entire area was completely overtaken by more law enforcement than I had ever witnessed responding to a single call before. Having moved very little from the place I initially stood since calling 911, I watched as at least 6 cops descended on Ivan at once, relieving the grip Jonathan had around his neck and forcibly, more than necessary, to my silent pleasure, detaining him and carrying him, practically hogtied, into a waiting cruiser. Apparently, while speaking with the cops after being securely restrained and unable to flee, Ivan insisted, continually, that I was his wife. God had told him, after all, that I was intended for him. It belonged to him, God said. He was simply there that morning to collect that which he had been promised. Story 14. Nightmare experience at my friend's cabin. My story involves myself and 3 of my really good friends throughout my whole childhood. We'll have them go by Kevin, Ryan, and Tommy, whom I am good friends with to this day. I could not write this story to you without their help, consent, and experience as well. The story you are about to read is true and not made up in any way. Regardless whether we had been seeing things or not, the reality is we had experienced something very horrifying the one night at my friend Kevin's cabin. We thought long and hard about actually sharing it or not, afraid of being ridiculed, but we are ready to share with the community, and again you had to be there to experience it. One of my friends had actually suffered a nervous breakdown after the incident and needed counseling in itself. Regardless, I would like you to know also I have always been a skeptic on the paranormal and find it very hard to believe in many aspects. But I love to watch, listen, and read on it simply because I always love to have an open mind in life. An open mind, in my opinion, is a growing one. Whether it was paranormal or not, someone was clearly there that night. Now finally on with the story. During the midsummer, usually around the middle of July, me and a couple of my good friends, who I had mentioned, all the way through my childhood always made time to go up to my one friend's family cabin way up north in the forest of Minnesota, cabin located on Vermilion Lake. Throughout all of our young years we would always go, for sure accompanied, by my friend's dad, Kevin's dad who owned the cabin, and sometimes a few of our dads as well. Once we were juniors in high school we felt mature and old enough to go to the cabin on our own finally without Kevin's dad or any other adult supervision that may have accompanied us. I would like to mention a little information in regards to my friend's cabin to help you picture the scenario. My friend's cabin is very remote and very little based upon a very large-sized island. Other cabins were on the island, but the next one closest to us was a solid QRT, or half-mile away at least, which is my best guess, which you could get to by taking a man-made path around the island. And I want to mention that to get to my friend's cabin, you had to park on a gravel road on the opposite side of the island, as his cabin was on an island, and take his boat across the lake about a half-mile to reach the cabin. This lake is huge. My mind always had a tendency to run around when sleeping there at night throughout all my years, for it was all one level with only 2 bedrooms next to one another, a kitchen/living room connected, and a bathroom in the back of the cabin. And when you slept in the cabin there was always at least one window in each room with no curtain to it at all, so it was very easy to see outside to the woods and lake, and this is where my mind would run as I always thought someone was peering in. Of course nobody ever was. I had been to this cabin a dozen times throughout my lifespan and nothing had ever happened, and the older I got the easier it was to sleep. Now for the event. We usually would stay a week's worth or 4/5 nights. On the 3rd night during the trip, when we were finally there on our own, we had set up a campfire and had been drinking beer all night. I don't condone underage drinking, by the way, we just happened to sneak some, being the rebels we are. We went out to his dock to gaze up at the magnificent stars and enjoy our buzz when all of a sudden we heard something out at the water that sounded like a fish jumping out to catch a bug. We quickly looked out at the lake with curiosity, wondering where the splash came, having our poles ready 24/7. Thankfully the moon was out that night, which helped lit up the lake, otherwise it would be dark as black with there being no city lights for miles upon miles, and we would not have been able to see anything on the lake. My one friend, Ryan, began to point out, saying, "What the hell is that?" After looking closely and finally spotting what he was pointing at, all I can describe it was it simply looked like a head out in the middle of the lake, just floating about, staring at us directly. It was about 3/4 worth of a football field length out in the lake from the dock. There is no question that I could see its features. It had long black hair and very pale skin like a face, but couldn't make out the eyes, mouth, nose, or chin, as if it was just a blob of pale skin with long black hair over it. I'll never forget the feeling that came over me. The hairs on my legs, neck, arm all stood up and I was paralyzed on the inside, ready to leave that moment. But we told ourselves it was just a loon, as these birds are very popular night drifters on the lake and do their hunting late, and also have black with white colors on their coats and hunt by diving deep into the water, holding their breath up to minutes sometimes. So it was possible that a loon all of a sudden popped up in the water after hunting a bit, or at least we tried to talk ourselves into that scenario. All of us having the creeps and noticing it wasn't moving one bit, just treading water in its same place, went back to our campfire, lit it even brighter, and headed inside to drink more. I would like to mention that there was a staircase outside my friend's cabin, about 8 stairs in length down to the bottom where the fire pit was and dock. We soon forgot about the head with the help of the beer until I had to use the bathroom really badly and the one inside was preoccupied. I just went outside to do my business, since we were in the great outdoors. When I had been taking a pee and glancing out at the beautiful moonlit lake, I noticed that the black circle object was still there, but about 30 yards closer now, still looking as if it was staring right at me. I could easily see the nose on this thing's face. Again, it was very pale, like it hadn't seen the sun for years. A very, very uneasy feeling came over me, and I immediately went inside and told my other friends to come look quick, keeping my eyes glued to it at the door to the cabin. We came outside to see it still there looking at us as if this head was corked up at us with its chin in the air. Nobody dared go down to the dock anymore, and we immediately went back inside, ruling out that it probably wasn't a loon because a loon wouldn't have tread the water in the same spot. Eventually the current would have drifted it somewhere else in a rocking manner. For a loon to stay in the same spot for almost an hour or two made no sense to any of us. This head-like object was stiff as a board and not moving a single muscle, just staring up at us from the deck instead. There was no ripple effect at all in the lake from the object. We said it was just a log and went back in. I could tell everyone else felt uneasy too. A few hours would pass. It was super late into the night at this point and knew we needed sleep. Being my curious self, I looked back outside once more, and the black object had completely vanished. That I could help but feel a sense of relief, thinking the log must have floated off or just hit shore somewhere. As we slept with the windows open that night, there was no AC in this cabin and we had to open them or we would fry in his cabin. With it being the middle of summer, me and my other buddy, Tommy, slept in the living room while my 2 other friends slept in the 2 separate bedrooms with their doors open. Not being able to sleep but keeping my eyes peeled shut, I began to hear someone walking around at the bottom of the stairs to the cabin, around the campfire and at the bottom of the stair. I thought I was about to shit bricks. No question what or whoever I heard down there was of the dock now, pacing back and forth as it made the sound of a boot clicking on the wood. It was if they weren't sure what to do with themselves. It lasted for about 3 minutes. Wanting to whisper to my buddy but frozen in fear, I just kept my eyes shut and ears on full alert. The footsteps sounded like they took 2 steps up the deck stairs all of a sudden, but then turned around and sounded like they were sprinting out down the man-made path. After it sounded like the steps were long gone and a couple minutes had passed, I woke up Tommy asking if he heard the steps. Both of us sitting up, I was startled to my friend, Ryan, walking out of his room and saying we need to leave a minute after these steps vanished. He must have heard us talking, so felt he could come out as well, but either way he was waking us up regardless. Something was very disturbing about his expression and I asked him, why? He woke up my other friend, Kevin, in the other room and said, let's go. Get to the boat. It's time to go. Asking him, what? What? Ryan, what the hell is wrong with you? He explained to us quickly while grabbing his stuff, and I will never forget what he explained to my other friends. He said when he was turning sides on his bed to get more comfortable, he saw someone peeking in at the top right corner of his window and it quickly shifted out of his view. He said all he saw was one eye, ghostly white skin, and black hair long down the window. Again, another thing I would like to add. When we look back at what he experienced, it chills us to the bone, realizing that, since this face was in the top right corner of the window in my friend's room that he was sleeping in, this thing either was damn near 8 feet tall, standing on something like bricks trying to peek in, or was floating. Ryan then continued to say, let's fucking go. very seriously. Absolutely disturbed the fuck out of my mind and feeling like I was gonna be sick, and then telling them what my friend and I heard in the living room. We all agreed and packed our stuff and booked it, not cleaning the cabin or anything. We always had to clean the cabin before leaving. We locked up, and as we headed down the stairs we saw bare footprints in the dirt heading off into the path and all around the cabin. We picked up our step getting to the boat, not knowing what was watching us or around us. Threw our stuff on the boat, untied it and sped off. I didn't even think about the head in the water anymore or to look in the water, thank God. My eyes were just glued to the island trying to spot anything moving, but I saw nothing. When we had finally gotten our stuff packed in the car and boat tied up, we hopped in the car and took off. We had been driving out about 10 miles, and out of the blue Ryan, who said he saw the person outside his windows, all of a sudden broke down in the car sobbing, saying, "What was it, guys? Oh fuck, what did I see?" We called to tell our parents what had happened on the way back and that Ryan was freaking out, and they told us to just get home safely and quickly. It was late, about 4 or 5 in the morning, but no one slept, and it was a very quiet ride home. My friend's dad, who owns the cabin, went up that following weekend and said he experienced nothing while there, but did mention bare footprints were still lingering about, which he thought odd because someone was walking around his property, which bugged him badly. Whatever my one friend saw in the window really hit him hard. After his breakdown, he had trouble sleeping multiple nights and ended up having to seek some help for a couple weeks and hop on some sleeping medicine. As time went on, he ended up being fine, but became comfortable sleeping next to a window without a curtain. To this day I cannot explain what happened and why it seemed to happen to us, and cannot explain what I saw in the lake and what Ryan specifically saw. Nothing has ever happened at that cabin since that night, so we were told by my friend's dad, who owns it, which I believe him. I personally have never decided to go back to the cabin, which really makes me sad because I had great childhood memories there. Tommy and Kevin both have gone back and been fine, but Ryan refuses to go back in him with him. A lot of people have cabins on this island, so it could have been a prank in the makings that had been busted when Ryan saw the person at the window, or the person possibly wanting to do something worse. I will never be able to explain what was floating in the lake, but the fact that this incident, along with bare feet and someone looking in at Ryan at night, all happened on the same night seems like more than a coincidence. Story 15. Butcher knife guy on graveyard shift. This happened to me 2 years ago. It was my first month on the job and I work night security at this pretty interesting place. For the record, I still work there and have more strange stories possibly to tell in the future. I am a 38-year-old male. I've worked security jobs most of my life and the graveyard shift. I was an event security guard for various well-known concert venues for years. So, I've seen my fair share of strange things and crazy people. In other words, I don't scare easily and hardly ever go into a panic mode when a crisis comes up. The place I currently work is a resort-style apartment complex. To get the layout, there are 3 floors of apartments with 50 units on each floor. This place takes up 1 city block with a golf course in the back, indoor swimming pools, hot tubs, and a small movie theater. You name it, this place has it. Most of the residents are retired doctors, lawyers, and otherwise rich. There are some younger people that live here as well, stockbrokers and real estate agents and so on. Some just use their apartment in the summer and leave as soon as the snow falls. It is located in a well-known tourist town in the United States. The building itself has 12 exits on the first floor. The doors are locked at 11 p.m. You can exit, but you can't get back in unless you go to the front of the building and ask to be buzzed in, or pick up the call box phone next to whatever exit you are at. It will ring the company cell phone and I answer and can come let you in. The front lobby is set up much like a hotel, with sliding glass doors which I lock when I start my shift. In the middle of the building on the first floor are 2 big slider doors which I also lock. They lead to the private parking lot. The parking lot itself is gated and you need a code to get in. This was midsummer, and while it's never really hot here, tonight was an exception. It was still very warm after the sun had set. I came in 10 minutes to 11 to start my shift. We have a routine to hand off the keys, event log, and phone to the next person on duty. Despite its size, I am the only security person here at night. My coworker who was leaving told me the side iron gates that lead to the parking lot are open on one side because they are stuck. This is nothing new and they often do get jammed. She told me the repair people would be in tomorrow sometime to fix them, but to just do some extra patrol out there tonight. This place sits across the road from a public park, and while the area is pretty decent, the park tends to breed druggies and homeless at night who sometimes like to try and wander on the property or cause trouble. My night started out as uneventful. As a security guard in this place, we only have pepper spray, a large flashlight, keys, and a company cell phone to call 911 if need be. We are told not to confront bodily harm, nor can we detain anyone. We are simply eyes and ears, and to call the police if something comes up. Of course, you can defend yourself if you need to, but in all cases, if you are in danger, calling the police is the company policy. Basically, I am to walk the grounds and floors for anyone suspicious, watch the cameras in the security office, which is in the lobby, and otherwise try to stay alert. If a resident calls for a maintenance request, I would take the information down in the computer for day shift, or if a resident called with a security issue, I would attend to it. Pretty easy enough job, I thought. I locked the doors to the parking lot and the lobby doors. I did a sweep of all the floors and then found myself back at the desk. It was really quiet and it rolled around to 3 a.m. I had just sat down to eat my lunch when the company cell phone rang. The caller ID let me know it was from one of our outside call box phones. I picked it up and said, "Thanks for calling, resort name here. This is Security Officer James. How can I help you?" All I heard was someone breathing heavy. I glanced at the cameras and could see the shadow of a figure standing just out of reach from the door and camera view. All I could see was the open call box and the metal cord from the phone. I again asked how I can help. The man started to breathe heavier and laugh, then silence. It was one of those laughs you hear in a movie when the lunatic is about to do something terrible. I got up from my chair and started to walk out of the office and to the door he was at when it rang again. This time from call box 2, which was further down. I quickly looked at the camera and saw this large figure in a hooded jacket. I knew this was strange as it was very warm outside. He was holding a black bag in his hands but had his back to the camera. "I'm coming for you and you're gonna die," this voice said in a raspy, deep tone. He hung up before I had the chance to say anything. Then the phone rang again. This time I picked up, and before he could speak I let him know the cops are on their way and to leave the property now as he is on camera. He tried the doors and both were locked. This time he was at yet another call box. This guy had to be running at top speed to make it to the next and the next call box, as they are a good distance between doors on the outside. "I can see you. Are you ready to die? The cops won't make it here in time," the guy said. I spoke loud and pretended like I was talking to another security officer and asked him to send 3 other security guards to such and such a location and that police are dispatched. The guy slammed the phone down loud against the call box receiver, and I watched him on camera take off into the darkness to the park area. I figured it scared him off. I was going to call the police, but honestly the location of this place, it would take them at least 15 minutes to get here, and I figured this guy was just some tweaker from the park. I scanned the cameras and walked the back lot just to be sure no one was there. I had my pepper spray in my hands just in case, but no one was out there. I returned to my desk and wrote what happened in the incident log. About a half hour passed and I had finished lunch and was just about to do rounds when the phone rang again. This time it was from an unknown number. I thought it would be a resident calling for a repair issue or something. I picked up and said my normal line. "Where are the cops?" "I don't see them, but I see you," the voice said. It was that guy again. I scanned the cameras and did not see anything. I went to the front door to look out and there was nothing but darkness and a few front floodlights on. "I know you're alone and you are going to die soon," he said. I basically told him to get fucked and hung up. I called the non-emergency number to 911 and let them know what was going on. The dispatcher said she would send out a car to check the area and make contact with me. Next thing I hear is a loud thud against the glass windows to the day manager's office, which sits across from the security room. Another 3 loud bangs. I run to the door and unlock it. I pull up the shades and shine my flashlight through the window into the darkness. I catch the face of this hooded man. He looked to be about 40 with long stringy hair poking down and these wild eyes. He looked right at me and grinned before slamming his head into the window to try and break it. I started yelling at him and told him the cops are coming and to get the fuck out of here. That's when he pulled the biggest damn butcher knife I've ever seen and made a slicing motion like he would use it to cut my throat. This guy was crazy and probably on drugs. He continued slamming his body against the glass trying to break it. He used his head to try and break the window but managed to bust his head open, so the window now has blood all over it. I backed out of the office and locked the door to it. I then decided to wait for the cops as this guy was out of control and my pepper spray wasn't going to stop him, and the last thing I wanted was to handle a bloody crazy person. He then ran to the nearest side door and took the call box phone off the hook. He then ran to each call box and removed all the phones, which caused my company cell phone to ring and jam up the line. This guy had to be on meth or something because he ran as fast as I could imagine. I watched the camera and noticed to my horror the sliding door to the garage was open. Now it was common for residents to go out to their cars and unlock the door themselves. It's just a sliding lock like the kind in department stores, but this is the last thing I need with this nut job running around. I sprinted across the building and took a shortcut through a couple banquet rooms to make it to the garage. As I was doing so, I saw that crazy guy running up the garage pathway. I slid that door as fast as I could and locked it before he got to the entryway. He then slammed his body into the glass. Over and over, but the door did not move. I locked the second set of doors in case he got through the outside ones, he would at least be trapped or slow him down. I reached for my pepper spray, thinking maybe he would just leave, and yelled, "The cops are here." He started to laugh and howl and then held that knife up again before running into the darkness of the parking garages. I called the cops on my personal cell phone to let them know that the man has a knife. The dispatcher told me the cops will be there shortly, and I let her know what happened. I made my way to the front again and locked myself in the security office. At least this place had no windows and I could watch on camera. I heard another loud thud and bang and realized he was at the front lobby doors trying to get in. I was hoping the cops would roll up any minute, but they didn't, and while it probably didn't take them long, it felt like forever at this point. The guy was standing at the lobby doors with the knife in hand. He faced the camera, and by this time his hood had fallen back. He was bald-headed with wild, long, stringy, crazy hair on the sides of his head. His eyes were huge, and I will never forget that grin on his face as he mouthed to the camera, "Die, die," while making stabbing motions with that knife. Blood running across his face from slamming into the glass, he then ran out into the darkness. About 5 minutes later, the cops show up. They sent one officer. He asked me what the guy looked like, and I told him I have camera footage. He drove through the area first and shined a spotlight. The cop returned to tell me he couldn't find anyone, and he had driven around the entire block and back area behind the golf course. I showed him the footage and printed out a picture from the camera. The cop said he didn't see any sign of the guy and that he would patrol the area and to call back if he came again. It was now nearly 5 a.m. when the cop left. I waited until 6 a.m., when it was daylight and people were starting to get out and about, before I walked around and hung up all the phones from the call boxes. This guy literally took all 12 phones off the hook. When my manager came in during the morning shift at 8 a.m., I told her what happened, and she said that they would keep an eye out and have a meeting to let everyone who worked here know and to be aware. They had an extra security guard on my shift for 2 weeks after, but the guy never returned. The cops never found the guy or who he was. So crazy, bloody guy with the knife. Let's not meet again. Story 16. Why I never trust a clown. Before anything, a little backstory. I was 10 at the time and was visiting my hometown, Ecuador, for the summer. At the time I knew just about everyone in my small little town, Alausi, and so did my parents, which is why they let me go on my own that day. Anyways, here's my encounter. Back when I was 10 years old, my family decided to take a visit to my hometown of Ecuador. We went for the summer and planned out just about our whole stay. One day, my mom and dad were getting ready to go to a wedding and I was in the house with them. My big sister went over to a friend's house and my other relatives had already left for the wedding. I was supposed to stay at home, alone for the duration, but I saw that it was a beautiful day out and decided to ask my mom and dad to go to a park that was no more than 2 blocks away. They were reluctant at first, stating that there would be nobody to take care of me, but I argued that it was a beautiful day out and there was no way that the park would be empty. They kept getting dressed as I kept on arguing until they finally gave in. They said that I can go to the park as long as I was back before dark. I agreed and ran outside to head for the park. It took me no more than 10 minutes to get there and I was ready to make new friends and play around. But, oddly enough, there was nobody else in the park. It looked abandoned, which was weird seeing how this was one of 2 parks in the whole city. It should have been packed, but I paid no mind to it. I believe I ran over to a swing set, or slide, it was 12 years ago, I can't remember, and played around. As I played, I suddenly heard a voice from the distance. A clown was on the other side of a gate and motioned for me to get closer. Behind him was a white van which I had noticed before but just thought it was a delivery truck of sorts. I slowly started walking towards the clown and stopped a good distance away from him. He asked me, in Spanish, "Hey kid, do you like clowns?" I nodded no to him and he gave me that clown frown and then said, "Well then let me see if I can change that." He opened up his car and by looking inside I saw there were only 2 boxes, though I wasn't sure if they were filled with, and that was it. No seats, no posters, just those 2 boxes and then complete emptiness. Being a child, I still paid no mind to it and watched as he pulled out a deflated balloon. He wrapped his lips around the end and blew till the balloon was fully inflated. He tied the end and started to form the balloon into a balloon animal of a dog. He showed it to me and I smiled. He then motioned me to come closer, to which I complied. He handed the balloon to me and said, "Do you like?" I nodded yes this time and gave him a little smile. He then grinned in the creepiest way possible. The grin was so creepy that even as a kid I knew to back away a bit. The clown then said that if I wanted to see the rest of his tricks I would have to get into the truck. I told him that the exit was on the other side of the park and I wouldn't be able to climb the small gate. He then said the few words that haunt me to this day. "Get a little closer and I'll carry you over. Then we can have loads of fun in my truck, come on kid." While saying this he still had that creepy grin plastered across his face. I merely backed away and told him, "No, it's okay, sir." His grin turned into anger as though he was annoyed at this. He placed his hands on his hips and said to me, "But we're going to have so much fun." Right when he said that I heard a voice on the other side of the park yelling, Son, I'm here to pick you up." I turned and saw a man that I recognized as a local neighbor. He was not my real father, obviously, but the little me knew to run over to him. I said nothing to the clown, I just ran to the man and gave him a hug. The man waved to the clown and said, "Thanks for keeping my kid entertained." To which the clown replied, "No problem." As we turned around I was able to hear this man murmur, "Sick fuck." I looked at him and asked, "Sir, what exactly is going on?" He gave a sigh and explained everything. As it turns out, that was no real clown. He was a man that had been kidnapping kids across all of Ecuador. He would lure kids with the clown costume and take them away to God knows what place. The people of my town had a feeling he was coming to our town, which was why the whole park was deserted. He said that he was walking by when he noticed that I was talking to the clown and ran over to basically save me. As he told me this, he also dialed for the police to report the incident. We had finally arrived at my house and this man said, "Be careful who you talk to, son. Not everyone is who they seem." I gave him one final hug and gave him a thanks for saving me from that sick fuck. He gave me a rub on the head and said, "It's okay my boy, now hurry on and I have my own things to worry about." I nodded and ran in the house. Nobody was there and by the time they had returned I had decided not to tell anyone since I knew they'd flipped the fuck out. It took a while to forget about the whole incident, especially with those words that kept reminding me of him, but I soon forgot till I came across this page and memories of that clown flooded my head. I'm not quite sure what happened to the sicko, but hopefully he is now behind bars. So to that creepy clown from long ago, let's not meet.